She thought marriage was supposed to save her, but what if the man she married for protection became the only danger she couldn't run from? Tonight, I'm bringing you a story of gunfire and whispered vows, of a woman who witnessed murder and the cowboy who offered her more than just shelter. Stay with me until the very end, and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of love born from fear can travel across the world. The gunshot cracked through the midnight air like the breaking of bone, sharp and final, echoing off the wooden storefronts of Silver Creek's main street. Nora Callan's needle froze mid-stitch, the wedding dress she'd been hemming forgotten as her blood turned to ice water in her veins. She'd been working late in her seamstress shop, the oil lamp burning low, trying to finish Mrs. Henderson's daughter's gown before the weekend ceremony. Now that single sound, a sound she'd heard only twice before in her 26 years, made every instinct in her body scream the same word: run. But she didn't run. Not yet. Instead, Nora did what would change the course of her entire life. She moved to the window. Through the gap in the calico curtains, she saw them, two figures in the alley across the street, illuminated by the silver wash of moonlight and the distant glow from the Silver Star Saloon. One man stood tall, his fine coat and polished boots marking him as someone of means. The other lay crumpled on the ground, a dark pool spreading beneath him like spilled ink. Even from this distance, even in the uncertain light, Nora recognized them both. The standing man was Conrad Blackstone, owner of the Blackstone Mining Company, the wealthiest and most powerful man in the Wyoming Territory. Some said he had politicians in his pocket. Others whispered he had lawmen on his payroll. Everyone agreed on one thing: you didn't cross Conrad Blackstone and live to tell about it. The man on the ground wore a U.S. Marshal's badge that caught the moonlight as his body settled into stillness. Nora's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. She should step back. She should blow out her lamp and pretend she'd seen nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. That's what any sensible woman would do. That's what would keep her alive. But as she watched, frozen in horror, Conrad Blackstone raised his head and looked directly at her window. Their eyes met across the darkness, and Nora felt her heart stop. His face was calm, almost serene, utterly untroubled by the murder he'd just committed. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, held a promise that chilled her to the marrow. You saw, and now you're mine. He smiled, actually smiled. Then he raised his pistol and fired. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Nora threw herself backward, hitting the floor hard as bullets tore through her shop. Fabric bolts burst open, spilling silk and cotton across the floorboards. Her sewing table shattered, sending spools of thread rolling in every direction. The mirror on the far wall fractured into a spider's web of cracks. She crawled on her hands and knees toward the back door, glass cutting through her skirts, her palms. Another shot. Another. The methodical spacing told her he was reloading, taking his time, knowing she had nowhere to go. The back door led to an alley with only one exit, straight past where he stood. "Miss Callan!" Blackstone's voice carried through the broken window, smooth as butter, pleasant as a Sunday sermon. "There's no need for this unpleasantness. Come out and let's discuss what you think you saw. I'm certain we can reach an understanding." An understanding, as if she hadn't just watched him murder a federal marshal in cold blood. Nora's hand closed around the back door handle. She had seconds, maybe less. Once she opened this door, she'd be committed. There would be no going back, no pretending, no safe return to the quiet life she'd built in Silver Creek after fleeing the memories of her childhood in Boston. The front door of her shop splintered inward with a crash. Nora yanked open the back door and ran. The alley was dark, narrow, rank with the smell of refuse and horses. Her boots slipped on something wet. She didn't want to know what, and she nearly went down, catching herself against the rough brick wall. Behind her, she heard Blackstone's measured footsteps entering her shop, heard his voice calling to someone. "She went out back. Cut her off at Market Street." They were coordinating. How many men did he have? Nora hitched up her skirts and sprinted for the mouth of the alley. She could see the main street ahead, still lit by the saloon's glow, still alive with the sounds of piano music and rough laughter. If she could just reach the crowd, maybe someone would help her. Maybe... A figure stepped into the alley's exit, blocking her path. Nora skidded to a stop, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The man was massive, broad-shouldered, with a face like weathered leather and a gun belt slung low on his hips. One of Blackstone's mine guards. She'd seen him before, collecting insurance payments from the smaller businesses in town. "Now, Miss Callan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Mr. Blackstone just wants to talk. No need to make this difficult." Behind her, she heard Blackstone's footsteps getting closer. She was trapped. Nora's eyes darted around the alley, searching for anything, a door, a window, a gap between buildings. Nothing. Just brick walls and locked doors and the two men closing in from either end like the jaws of a trap. The guard reached for her, and then something extraordinary happened. A rope dropped from above, falling past Nora's shoulder to land in a coil at her feet. She looked up in shock to see a man on the roof of the building beside her, a tall figure silhouetted against the star-strewn sky. He held the other end of the rope secured around a chimney, and his free hand gestured urgently, "Climb." Nora didn't hesitate. She grabbed the rope, wrapped it around her wrist the way her brother had taught her years ago when they'd played in their father's warehouse, and started climbing. Her arms screamed with the effort. Her shoulders burned. The rough hemp tore at her palms, but she climbed anyway, hand over hand, boots scrabbling against the brick wall for purchase. Below her the guard cursed and lunged, his fingers closing on the hem of her skirt. Nora kicked backward, hard, and felt her boot connect with something, his face maybe, or his shoulder. He howled and released her, and she scrambled upward with renewed desperation. The stranger on the roof reached down, grabbed her arm, and hauled her up the last few feet with a strength that suggested he'd done this sort of thing before. Nora collapsed onto the rough shingles, gasping for air, her entire body shaking. "Can you run?" the man asked. She looked up at him, really looked, for the first time. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that suggested years spent outdoors in harsh conditions. His dark hair was too long, curling slightly at his collar, and his eyes, even in the darkness, she could see they were a startling shade of gray, held an intensity that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason than fear. "Can you run?" he repeated, more urgently this time. Below them, Blackstone emerged from the alley, his face turned upward, that same cold smile playing at his lips. "Well, well," he called up. "Wade Forrester, I should have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Seems you've developed a habit of that lately." The stranger, Wade, ignored him. He pulled Nora to her feet, his hand warm and calloused around hers. "There's a way across to the next building. We need to move, now." "I can run," Nora said, finding her voice at last. "Then run." They ran. The rooftops of Silver Creek became a treacherous landscape of gaps and slopes, of loose shingles and hidden pitfalls. Wade moved with the sure-footed confidence of someone who'd mapped every inch of this territory, leaping across the spaces between buildings, offering his hand when the gaps were too wide, pulling Nora along with him. Behind them, she could hear shouts, the clatter of boots on wooden stairs, the sharp reports of gunfire. A bullet whined past her ear, so close she felt the heat of it. Wade yanked her sideways behind a brick chimney. They crouched there, pressed close together, both breathing hard. Nora could feel his heart pounding, or maybe that was her own. She couldn't tell. The warmth of his body beside hers was simultaneously comforting and unsettling. "How many men does he have?" Wade asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. At least 3, maybe more." "What did you see?" Nora met his eyes. "He killed Marshall Hendricks. Shot him in cold blood, then looked up and saw me watching." Wade's jaw tightened. "You're certain it was Blackstone?" "I know what I saw." "Then you're the only witness who can put a noose around his neck." He peered around the chimney, assessing their options. "And he'll kill every person in this town to make sure you never testify." The words settled over Nora like a shroud. She'd known, of course, from the moment Blackstone had smiled at her through the window, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that chilled her blood. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me." Wade turned back to her, and something flickered in his gray eyes, something she couldn't quite read. "Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to see Conrad Blackstone hang. Now come on, there's a stable 2 buildings over. If we can get to the horses—" More gunfire, closer this time. They could hear men on the rooftops now, spreading out, cutting off their escape routes. Wade grabbed her hand again and they ran, staying low, moving from shadow to shadow. They reached the edge of a building and Wade stopped, looking down into the alley below. It was a long drop, at least 15 feet to the ground, too far to jump safely. But tied to a post directly below was a horse, a big roan gelding with a saddle already on its back, as if someone had just dismounted and gone into the building for a quick drink. Wade looked at Nora. "Do you trust me?" "I don't even know you." "Fair point. Do you want to live?" "Yes." "Then trust me for the next 30 seconds. He swung his legs over the edge of the roof and dropped, landing with surprising grace atop the saddle. The horse startled, dancing sideways, but Wade steadied it with a few quiet words and firm hands on the reins. He looked up at Nora. "Jump, I'll catch you." Nora looked behind her. She could see the silhouettes of men moving across the rooftops, getting closer. She could hear Blackstone's voice, directing them like a general commanding troops. She looked down at Wade, at this stranger who'd appeared from nowhere to save her, whose reasons she didn't understand but whose eyes promised something she desperately needed, a chance. Nora jumped. The fall seemed to last forever and no time at all. The wind rushed past her ears, her stomach lurched, and then Wade's arms closed around her, strong and sure. She crashed against him, nearly knocking them both from the saddle, but he held firm, one arm wrapped tight around her waist, while the other controlled the reins. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the horse into motion. They exploded out of the alley at a gallop, the horse's hooves striking sparks from the hard-packed dirt of the street. Nora wrapped her arms around Wade's waist and pressed herself against his back, making herself as small a target as possible. Around them, Silver Creek erupted into chaos. Men poured out of the saloon, drawn by the commotion. Women screamed. Someone shouted about horse thieves, and behind them, Blackstone's men opened fire. Wade guided the horse with expert skill, weaving between wagons and water troughs, taking turns at breakneck speed that had Nora's heart in her throat. A bullet struck a post inches from her head. Another kicked up dirt between the horse's front legs, but the animal didn't falter, driven forward by Wade's steady control. They raced down Main Street, past the church and the schoolhouse, and the general store where Nora had bought ribbon just that morning, a lifetime ago now. The sounds of pursuit followed them, horses being mounted, orders being shouted, the thunder of hoofbeats. At the edge of town, Wade turned the horse sharply onto a narrow trail that led into the forest. The darkness swallowed them like they'd plunged into deep water. Pine branches whipped at their faces and arms. The horse's breathing became labored as the trail climbed steeply upward into the hills. "They'll follow," Nora said, her voice shaking. "Let them try," Wade replied. "They don't know these mountains like I do." They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, climbing higher and higher until the lights of Silver Creek were nothing but distant pinpricks far below. Wade seemed to know every twist and turn of the trail, even in near total darkness. Several times he led them off the path entirely, the horse picking its way carefully through dense undergrowth, and Nora realized he was deliberately obscuring their trail. Finally, when the horse was stumbling with exhaustion and Nora's entire body ached from the brutal ride, Wade brought them to a stop beside a small creek. The water gurgled over smooth stones, peaceful and oblivious to the violence they'd fled. Wade dismounted first, then reached up to help Nora down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She would have fallen if Wade hadn't steadied her, his hands firm on her arms. "We can rest here for a few minutes," he said. "Let the horse drink and catch his breath. But we can't stay long." Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of what had happened crashed down on her. Her shop, her livelihood, everything she'd worked for in the 3 years since arriving in Silver Creek was destroyed. She was a wanted woman, hunted by the most powerful man in the territory. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the help of a stranger whose motives she didn't understand. She walked a few steps away from Wade and bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath and force back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. "Are you injured?" Wade asked, concern evident in his voice. "No." "Yes." "I don't know." She straightened, wrapping her arms around herself. "My hands are cut from the glass. Nothing serious." Wade retrieved a canteen from the saddlebag. This horse had clearly been well supplied by its previous owner, and approached her carefully, as if she were a spooked animal that might bolt. "May I see?" Nora held out her hands. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, She could see dark streaks of blood across her palms mixed with dirt and debris. Wade produced a clean handkerchief, surprisingly white for a man who lived rough, and wet it from the canteen, then gently cleaned her wounds. His touch was surprisingly careful, almost tender. "You're lucky," he said. "None of these are deep. They'll hurt like hell tomorrow, but they won't need stitching." "Lucky," Nora repeated, and a slightly hysterical laugh escaped her. "Yes, I'm extraordinarily lucky. I've only lost everything, witnessed a murder, and become a target for the most dangerous man in Wyoming. What a blessed evening." Wade's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit grim." "A bit?" Nora pulled her hands back, examining them in the moonlight. "Who are you, Wade Forrester? Why did you help me? And how did you happen to be on that rooftop at exactly the right moment?" Wade was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "I've been watching Blackstone's operations for a while now. I suspected he was into something deeper than just running mines, gun smuggling maybe, or dealing with outlaws. When I heard the gunshot tonight and saw him standing over the marshal's body, I knew it had just gotten a lot more serious. Then I saw you at the window, and I saw him see you, and I knew you'd need help getting out of there. That still doesn't explain why you helped me. Most men would have looked the other way." "I'm not most men." "Clearly." Nora studied him in the moonlight, this stranger who'd risked his life for her without hesitation. "Are you a lawman?" "Something like that." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I can give you right now." Wade moved to check the horse's legs, running his hands down each one carefully. "What matters is this. Conrad Blackstone just murdered a U.S. Marshal. That makes this a federal case, which means federal law enforcement will be very interested in talking to the only witness, which means you, Miss Callan, have just become the most valuable and most hunted woman in the Wyoming Territory." The word sent a chill down Nora's spine. "He'll never stop looking for me." "No, he won't. Not until you're dead or he is." "That's comforting." "I don't deal in comfort. I deal in truth." Wade finished checking the horse and turned back to her. "You have two choices. You can go to the Territorial Marshal's office in Cheyenne, tell them what you saw, and hope they can protect you until the trial. But Blackstone has deep pockets and long reach. He owns half the lawmen in this territory, and the ones he doesn't own he can buy or frighten. You'd be lucky to survive a week. And the second choice?" Wade met her eyes, and in that moment, Nora felt something shift between them, some invisible understanding passing without words. "You come with me. I have a ranch about 3 days' ride from here, up near the Montana border. It's remote, defensible, and Blackstone doesn't know about it. You stay there, hidden, while I work on building a case against him that's so airtight, even his money and influence can't break it. When the time is right, when it's safe, you testify, and we bring him down together." "You're asking me to put my life in the hands of a complete stranger." "I am." "That's insane." "It is. I'd be completely dependent on you for protection, shelter, everything." "You would." Nora laughed again, that same slightly wild edge to it. "My mother always warned me about trusting men I don't know, said it would lead to ruin." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. She also said that sometimes the devil you don't know is safer than the devil you do." Nora looked back the way they'd come, toward Silver Creek and the life she'd built there, now destroyed in a single night. Then she looked at Wade Forrester, this enigmatic stranger with the gray eyes and careful hands. "How do I know you're not just another man looking to use me for his own purposes?" "You don't," Wade said simply. "But I can promise you this. I will never force you to do anything against your will. If at any point you want to leave, you can. I'll give you supplies and point you toward the nearest town. No questions asked." "Why would you do that?" "Because—" Wade stopped, seemed to reconsider his words, then continued. "Because I've seen too many women suffer at the hands of powerful men. I won't be one more man who takes away a woman's choice." There was something in his voice when he said it, some old pain, some buried memory, that told Nora he meant every word. She took a deep breath, considering her options. "Stay here. alone in the wilderness with night falling and Blackstone's men surely organizing a search party. Try to reach Cheyenne on her own, with no horse, no supplies, and no knowledge of the territory. Or trust this stranger who'd appeared like some avenging angel on a rooftop and offered her what she needed most. Time. All right, she said finally. I'll come with you, but I need you to promise me something. What's that? Promise me that when this is over, when Blackstone is either in prison or in the ground, I can go back to my life, build a new shop somewhere, start fresh. That you won't ask me to be something I'm not or live a life I don't choose. Wade extended his hand. You have my word, Miss Callan. When this is done, you're free to go wherever you want and be whoever you want to be. No obligations. Nora looked at his outstretched hand, then placed her own torn and bloodied palm in his. His grip was firm, warm, and something about the way his hand closed around hers made her feel, for just a moment, like perhaps she wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. Nora, she said, if we're going to be hiding together in the wilderness, you might as well call me Nora. Wade, he replied, a hint of a real smile finally breaking through. And for what it's worth, Nora, I'm sorry about your shop. I know what it's like to lose everything you've worked for. Do you? Yes. He released her hand and turned toward the horse. But that's a story for another time. Right now we need to keep moving. Blackstone's men will have dogs out by dawn, and I'd like to put as much distance between us and them as possible before then. They mounted the horse again, Wade in front, Nora behind, her arms wrapped around his waist. It was unseemly, riding this way with a man she'd just met, their bodies pressed close together. But propriety seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. As they rode deeper into the mountains, the moon climbing higher overhead, Nora found herself studying the man in front of her. His shoulders were broad and straight, his posture in the saddle that of someone who'd spent countless hours on horseback. There was something military in the way he held himself, in the economical efficiency of his movements. Wade, she asked after a while. Yes? You said you're something like a lawman. What does that mean exactly? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, it means I work for people who care about justice even when the local law doesn't. It means I go places where regular lawmen can't or won't go. It means I do what needs to be done to bring men like Conrad Blackstone to justice, regardless of how much power they think they have. That sounds dangerous. It is. Have you ever... She trailed off, unsure how to phrase the question. Killed a man? Wade finished for her. Yes, when I've had to. But only men who are trying to kill me or innocent people first. The blunt honesty of his answer was somehow more comforting than if he'd tried to soften it or lie. Nora appreciated that he wasn't treating her like a fragile thing that needed to be protected from harsh truths. They rode in silence for a while longer, the horse picking its way carefully along trails that seemed to be little more than animal paths. Nora had no idea how Wade could navigate in this darkness, but he moved with certainty, never hesitating at the numerous forks and turns. How long have you been watching Blackstone? She asked. About 2 years. Ever since rumors started reaching certain federal offices about corruption in the mining operations out here. Missing shipments, falsified reports, workers who asked too many questions disappearing. I came out here to investigate, bought myself a small ranch as cover, and started building connections. And tonight? Tonight I was supposed to meet Marshall Hendricks. He'd been investigating Blackstone's operations from the official side while I worked undercover. He told me he'd found something big, something that would blow the whole operation wide open. I was supposed to meet him at midnight behind the Silver Star. Wade's voice hardened. I was late. 10 minutes late. If I'd been on time, he'd have killed you both, Nora interrupted firmly. Men like Blackstone don't leave witnesses when they've decided to act. If you'd been there, you'd be dead too. And I'd have no one to help me. So whatever's making you feel guilty about being late, let it go. You're alive, and that means we still have a chance to make this right. Wade glanced back at her over his shoulder, and in the moonlight she saw surprise and something else. Gratitude, maybe, or respect. You're tougher than you look, Nora Callan. I had 2 older brothers and grew up in a neighborhood where being soft got you hurt. I learned early that sometimes the only way through fear is straight ahead. She paused, then added, "Though I'll admit, this particular fear is somewhat larger than the neighborhood bullies I used to deal with." That earned her a real laugh, low and rough, as if he didn't do it often. "I'd say facing down Conrad Blackstone and his hired killers is a significant step up from neighborhood bullies, yes." They climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing colder, the trees pressing closer. Once they heard the distant baying of hounds, and Wade immediately turned them off the trail into a shallow stream where they rode for nearly a mile before emerging on the opposite bank. The water would confuse the scent, he explained, buy them more time. Dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold when Wade finally brought them to a stop in a small clearing. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "The horse needs it, and so do we. There's a cave just up that ridge where we can build a small fire without the smoke being seen." Nora's entire body ached. Her legs were trembling from hours of gripping the horse. Her back was screaming, and exhaustion weighed on her like a physical thing. But she followed Wade up the ridge to where a narrow opening in the rock face led to a shallow cave. Barely more than an overhang, really, but enough to provide shelter and hide them from view. Wade unsaddled the horse and tethered it where it could graze on the sparse grass. Then he gathered dry wood and built a small fire at the back of the cave, where the rock walls would disperse the smoke. From his saddlebag, he produced a battered coffee pot, some jerky, and hard biscuits. "I'm sorry it's not much," he said, putting coffee on to boil, "but it'll keep us going until we can get to the ranch." "It's fine." Nora sank down onto the ground near the fire, grateful for its warmth. The mountain air was significantly colder than the valley had been, and her dress, designed for working indoors, not fleeing for her life, offered little protection. Wade noticed her shivering and pulled a wool blanket from his pack, draping it over her shoulders. "Better?" "Yes. Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the morning birds beginning their songs outside. The coffee, when it was ready, was strong enough to wake the dead and nearly scalding hot, but Nora drank it gratefully, feeling the heat spread through her chest. "What will you do?" she asked finally. "About Marshall Hendrick's murder?" "I'll send word through channels I trust, people Blackstone can't reach or buy. It'll take some time, but eventually someone official will come to investigate. In the meantime, I'll gather evidence. Hendrick said he'd found something big. I need to find out what it was and where he hid it." "And me? What do I do while you're gathering evidence?" Wade looked at her across the fire. "You stay safe. You stay alive. That's your job right now, Nora, because without your testimony, any evidence I gather might not be enough. Blackstone's lawyers are good, the best money can buy, but they can't explain away an eyewitness to murder. You're the key that locks the door on him. So I'm bait." "No." Wade's voice was firm. "You're not bait. I won't use you that way. You're a witness who deserves protection, and you're a woman who deserves to live her life without looking over her shoulder. I'm going to make sure both of those things happen." The conviction in his voice made Nora believe him. This wasn't just a job to Wade Forrester. This was personal somehow, though she couldn't yet see why. As the sun climbed higher and the fire burned down to coals, exhaustion finally overwhelmed Nora's fear. Her eyes grew heavy, her head nodding forward. Wade noticed and gestured to a flat spot further back in the cave, away from the opening. "Sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch. What about you? You need rest too." "I've gone longer without sleep. I'll be fine for a few hours." When she hesitated, he added, "I promise I'll wake you in a few hours and take my turn. But right now you look like you're about to fall over, and we still have hard riding ahead of us." Nora was too tired to argue. She moved to the spot he'd indicated, wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, and lay down on the rocky ground. It was uncomfortable, cold, and nothing like her bed back in her rooms above the shop. But within minutes, exhaustion dragged her down into a dreamless sleep. When she woke, the sun was high overhead, and Wade was still sitting exactly where he'd been before, his back against the cave wall, his eyes scanning the forest below. The horse was still contentedly grazing. Everything was quiet, peaceful even, as if the violence of the previous night had been nothing but a nightmare. But the cuts on Nora's palms and the ache in her body told her it had been all too real. "You didn't sleep," she said, sitting up. Wade turned to look at her. "I'll sleep when we get to the ranch." Right now, we need to keep moving. They'll have spread the search wider by now. Nora stood, folding the blanket carefully. How much further? If we push hard, we can make it by tomorrow night. There's a trader's post about halfway where we can get supplies and maybe a fresh horse. The man who runs it is, let's say he's more loyal to gold than to Conrad Blackstone. Meaning you can buy his silence. Meaning exactly that. They broke camp quickly, Wade scattering the fire and obscuring any signs they'd been there. Before mounting the horse again, he paused and looked at Nora seriously. I need to prepare you for something, he said. When we get to the ranch, to the outside world, you'll need to be my wife. Nora's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? Not really, Wade clarified quickly. But that's the story we'll need to tell. A single man living alone with an unmarried woman would draw attention and questions. But a rancher and his wife? That's normal, expected even. It's the best way to keep people from looking too closely at you. So you want me to pretend to be married to you? I know it's asking a lot. Actually, Nora interrupted, it makes sense. Practical sense, I mean. Conrad Blackstone and his men are looking for Nora Callan, seamstress and spinster. They're not looking for Mrs. Wade Forrester, rancher's wife. She paused, then added with a slight smile, though I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook. Wade's lips twitched. Good thing I'm not. Come on, wife, we have ground to cover. They rode through the day and into the evening, stopping only when necessary to rest the horse or obscure their trail. As promised, they reached the trader's post, a rough collection of buildings in a narrow valley, just as the sun was setting. The trader, a grizzled man named McCready with more scars than teeth, took Wade's gold without asking questions. He provided them with a fresher horse, supplies, and news. Conrad Blackstone had indeed put out a substantial bounty on Nora Callan, $500 for her capture alive, 300 dead. Half the territory would be looking for her by now. You be careful out there, McCready said as they prepared to leave. A woman can't trust no one with that kind of money on her head. Men'll sell their own mothers for half that much. Good advice, Wade replied. We'll keep it in mind. They rode on through the night, Wade navigating by the stars when the trail was clear enough, slowing to a careful walk when it wasn't. Nora dozed against his back, jerking awake periodically when the horse stumbled or Wade changed direction. Somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, when the world was reduced to shadows and the sound of the horse's hooves on stone, Nora spoke softly. Wade? Yes? Thank you for saving me. For helping me when you didn't have to. He was quiet for a moment. Then, everyone deserves someone to stand with them when the world turns dangerous. Tonight, I got to be that person for you. Tomorrow, maybe someone else will be that person for me. That's how we survive, Nora. By standing together when we can. Nora tightened her arms around his waist slightly, resting her cheek against his back. Still, thank you. You're welcome. By the time the sun rose on their second day of flight, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, they'd put enough distance between themselves and Silver Creek that Wade finally allowed himself to relax slightly. The land here was wilder, emptier, with fewer trails and fewer people to see them passing. We're almost there, he said as they crested a ridge and looked down into a wide valley. Another few hours, and you'll be safe. Nora looked at the land spread out before them, vast and beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. Somewhere down there was a ranch house where she would hide and wait while Wade Forrester tried to build a case against the most powerful man in Wyoming. Somewhere down there was a temporary home with a man she barely knew but was already beginning to trust in ways she hadn't trusted anyone in years. Safe, she repeated, and wondered if she'd ever truly feel that way again. But as they rode down into the valley, with the morning sun warming her back and Wade's solid presence in front of her, Nora Callan felt something she hadn't expected to feel after the horror of the previous night. She felt hope. The Elkhorn Ranch appeared like a mirage in the afternoon heat, a sturdy log structure nestled against a hillside, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings scattered around it like children gathered at their mother's skirts. Smoke rose from the chimney in a lazy spiral, and Nora could see chickens pecking in the yard, hear the lowing of cattle somewhere beyond the buildings. It looked peaceful, settled, like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. But Nora had learned in the past 2 days that appearances could be deadly deceiving. Wade brought the exhausted horse to a stop near the water trough and dismounted, then reached up to help Nora down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground, and he caught her easily, steadying her until she found her balance. "I've got you," he said, quietly. Nora wanted to protest that she was fine, that she didn't need help, but the truth was she could barely stand. 2 days of hard riding with minimal rest and food had taken their toll. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands were still raw from the glass cuts, and exhaustion made everything feel distant and unreal, as if she were watching the world through gauze. A door slammed, and Nora looked up to see an older man emerging from the barn. He was lean and weathered, with a shock of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at Wade, then at Nora, and his expression shifted from surprise to understanding to concern in the space of a heartbeat. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "The worst kind," Wade replied. "Sam, this is Nora Callan. Nora, Sam Bridger. He manages the ranch when I'm away, which is most of the time." Sam touched the brim of his hat to Nora. "Ma'am, you look about done in. Let's get you inside." The interior of this ranch house was simple but well-maintained. Rough-hewn furniture, a stone fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig, windows that let in generous amounts of light. It was unmistakably a bachelor's dwelling, lacking the small touches that made a house a home, but it was clean and solid, and most importantly, it felt safe. Wade guided Nora to a chair near the fireplace while Sam put a kettle on for tea. The two men exchanged a look that conveyed an entire conversation without words, and Sam nodded once before heading back outside, presumably to care for the horse and keep watch. "He knows what's happening?" Nora asked. "Sam's been with me since I first came to Wyoming. He knows who I really am and what I do." Wade knelt beside her chair, studying her face with concern. "When's the last time you ate something substantial?" Nora tried to remember. The jerky and biscuits from yesterday morning seemed like a week ago. "I don't know. Before everything happened." "Right. Food first, then rest. Then we'll talk about what comes next." Wade moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out supplies. Bread, cheese, dried meat, a jar of what looked like preserves. His movements were efficient, practiced, and Nora found herself watching him with curiosity. This man who rode and shot like a soldier, who navigated wilderness like he'd been born to it, who cooked like he'd spent years fending for himself. "You said you've been undercover for 2 years, she said. "What did you do before that?" Wade paused in his work, his back to her. "I was a cavalry officer. Spent 8 years out west, most of it in Arizona Territory fighting the Apache Wars." He resumed cutting bread. "Got tired of following orders I didn't agree with, tired of seeing civilians caught in the crossfire of other men's ambitions. When a friend told me the Pinkerton Agency was looking for men with military experience who could work independently, I signed on. Been doing it ever since." "How long is ever since?" 5 years, 6 different assignments all over the West. Mine owners, cattle barons, railroad magnates, men who get so powerful they think they're above the law. My job is to prove they're not. The kettle whistled, and Wade poured hot water over tea leaves, bringing Nora a steaming cup along with a plate piled with food. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her, and then she was eating with an almost embarrassing urgency, barely pausing to breathe between bites. Wade watched her with a faint smile. "Easy. You'll make yourself sick." "Can't help it," Nora mumbled around a mouthful of bread and cheese. "This is the best food I've ever tasted." "That's exhaustion and fear talking. Trust me, my cooking is merely adequate." But to Nora, who'd been running on pure terror and adrenaline for 2 days, it tasted like a feast. She cleaned the entire plate, drank 2 cups of tea, and immediately felt her body begin to relax, the tight coil of panic in her chest finally starting to unwind. Wade cleared away the dishes, then returned and sat in the chair opposite hers. "We need to talk about the situation, about what happens next." "I know." Nora set down her teacup, forcing herself to focus despite the exhaustion. "You said I'd need to pretend to be your wife." "That was the plan, yes. But I've been thinking about it during the ride, and I realize it puts you in a difficult position. A woman's reputation is the least of my concerns right now," Nora interrupted. "Wade, there's a bounty on my head. Conrad Blackstone wants me dead. Do you honestly think I care what some gossip in a nearby town might say about my living arrangements? Fair point, but still, I want you to understand what you'd be agreeing to. We'd need to maintain the fiction not just here at the ranch, but anywhere we might be seen. That means acting like a married couple when Sam's ranch hands come around, when we go into town for supplies, anytime there's even a chance of someone seeing us who might talk. I understand. And it means you'd be trapped here, essentially. You couldn't leave, couldn't visit anyone, couldn't even write letters to friends or family without risking someone recognizing your handwriting or putting together where you are. Nora thought of her small circle of friends back in Silver Creek, the other shopkeepers she'd shared tea with, the women whose dresses she'd sewn, the minister's wife who'd been so kind when Nora first arrived in town, friendless and alone. She thought of her aunt in Boston, the only family she had left, who'd be worried sick when word reached her about what had happened. "How long?" she asked. "How long would I need to stay hidden?" Wade's expression was grave. "I don't know. Building a case against someone like Blackstone takes time. Weeks, certainly, possibly months. I need to find out what Marshal Hendricks discovered, gather enough evidence to make the territorial governor take action, and arrange protection for you when you testify. None of that happens quickly." "Months," Nora repeated, the weight of it settling over her. Months of hiding, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, of being completely dependent on a man she barely knew. The walls of the ranch house suddenly felt closer, the windows smaller. Wade must have seen the panic rising in her eyes because he leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Nora, look at me. You can do this. I know it seems impossible right now, but you're stronger than you think. You've already survived things that would have broken most people. You climbed a rope while being shot at, rode for 2 days straight without complaining, and you're still here, still fighting. Don't let fear convince you you're not capable of this." "I'm terrified," Nora admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you careful. It's when you stop being afraid that you make mistakes." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, solid and real. "But you're not alone in this. I'll be here. Sam will be here. You have people standing with you now." Nora looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her paler complexion, at the way his fingers engulfed hers. There was something deeply comforting about that simple contact, something that made her feel less adrift in the storm that had become her life. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it. I'll be Mrs. Wade Forrester until this is over." "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Wade said, and something in his tone made Nora look up sharply. "The story we tell needs to be believable. We need to know enough about each other that we can answer questions naturally, like any married couple would. And we need to have a story for how we met, how long we've been married, why you've suddenly appeared when none of the neighbors knew I had a wife. You've been thinking about this. I've been doing this kind of work long enough to know that details matter. One inconsistency, one moment where our stories don't match, and people start asking questions we can't afford to answer." Nora pulled her hand back and sat up straighter, her mind already working through the problem. 3 years of running a business had taught her the importance of planning, of thinking through contingencies. "So we need a cover story, something simple enough to remember but detailed enough to be convincing." "Exactly. All right, let's say we met in—" Nora paused, thinking. "Denver. I was working as a seamstress there. You were passing through on business. We courted for 6 months? That's respectable, but not so long that people would expect to have heard about it." Wade nodded, following her logic. "We married 3 months ago in Denver, and you stayed there to finish up some business commitments while I came back here to prepare the ranch for you. That explains why you're just arriving now." "And why none of your neighbors knew about me," Nora added. "What about family, if someone asks about my people?" "Keep it vague, but sad. Your parents passed when you were young. You were raised by an aunt who's since died. No siblings. It makes people less likely to press for details. Nobody wants to make a new bride cry by asking about her tragic past." "That's actually quite close to the truth," Nora said softly. "My parents did die when I was young. Yellow fever epidemic. I do have an aunt in Boston, but she's the only family I have left." Wade's expression softened. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. It's fine. It was a long time ago. Nora wrapped her arms around herself. What about you? What's your fictional backstory? I should know at least the basics about my supposed husband. The truth works well enough for me, modified slightly. I grew up in Missouri, joined the cavalry at 18, served for 8 years, then mustered out and came west to start a ranch. The only lie is omitting the Pinkerton work. As far as anyone knows, I'm just a rancher trying to build a life. And your family? Father died during the war. Mother passed a few years later. One brother who stayed in Missouri to run the family farm. We exchange letters occasionally, but aren't close. The way he said it, flat and emotionless, told Nora there was pain buried there. But she didn't press. They were still strangers in many ways, entitled to keep some things private. Right, she said. So, to summarize, we met in Denver, courted for 6 months, married 3 months ago, and I'm just now joining you at the ranch. My family is gone, yours is far away. We're newlyweds starting our life together. Simple. Simple, Wade agreed. Think you can remember all that? I made my living remembering dozens of women's measurements, fabric preferences, and design specifications. I think I can manage one fictional marriage. The corner of Wade's mouth quirked up. I forget you're a businesswoman. You're probably better at this kind of strategic thinking than I am. Let's hope so, because our lives depend on making this convincing. The door opened and Sam came in, stomping dirt off his boots. Horses settled, fed and watered. Didn't see any signs of followers, but I'll keep watch just the same. He looked at Nora. Ma'am, I took the liberty of airing out the spare room for you. It's not fancy, but the bed's clean and the window locks. Thank you, Mr. Bridger. That's very kind. Just Sam, ma'am. We don't stand on ceremony much out here. He glanced at Wade. You want me to ride into town tomorrow? Let folks know your wife's arrived? Not yet. Give it a few days. I want to make sure we weren't followed before we start spreading word. Smart. Sam moved to the stove and began preparing coffee. I'll keep the hands working the north pasture for now, away from the house. Fewer eyes, fewer questions. Nora looked between the two men, seeing the easy communication that spoke of long partnership and deep trust. How many men work here? 3 full-time hands, Wade answered. Good men, loyal, but they don't know about my other work. As far as they're concerned, I'm exactly what I appear to be, a rancher who spent years as a cavalry officer and knows how to handle trouble. When they come around the house, which isn't often, you'll need to be the devoted newlywed wife. I can do that. Nora paused, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. Wade, what exactly did Marshal Hendricks discover? You said he told you he found something big. Wade's expression darkened. He didn't give me details, just said he'd found proof that Blackstone's operation went far beyond simple corruption. He said it was bigger than anyone suspected, that it involved people in the territorial government, maybe even in Washington. He was going to give me the evidence that night. And now he's dead, and the evidence is missing. Presumably. I need to get back to Silver Creek, search his office and his rooms, find out what he discovered, but I can't leave until I'm certain you're safe here. How long will that take? A few days, maybe a week. I need to scout the area, make sure Blackstone's men didn't pick up our trail. I need to teach you the ranch, show you where everything is, make sure you can defend yourself if something happens while I'm gone. The thought of Wade leaving, of being alone in this remote place with only Sam and a few ranch hands between her and Blackstone's killers, made Nora's stomach clench with anxiety, but she forced herself to nod calmly. What do I need to learn? How to shoot, for one thing. Can you handle a gun? I've fired a rifle a few times. My brother taught me when I was young, but I'm not sure I could hit anything deliberately. We'll fix that. I'll teach you to shoot well enough to defend yourself. And I'll show you the escape routes, paths through the mountains that lead to safe places if you need to run. You won't be trapped here, Nora. You'll always have options. Sam set cups of coffee in front of them, the rich aroma filling the room. The lady looks dead on her feet, Wade. Maybe save the survival training for after she's had some proper rest. Wade looked at Nora and seemed to really see her for the first time since they'd arrived, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she was swaying slightly, even sitting down, the exhaustion written in every line of her body. You're right. Nora, finish your coffee and then Sam will show you to your room. Get some sleep. Everything else can wait. But we need to sleep, Wade said firmly. That's an order. I don't take orders, Nora said automatically, then felt her cheeks flush. Sorry, that came out more sharply than I intended. I'm not used to being told what to do. Noted, Wade said, but his eyes held a glimmer of amusement. Let me rephrase. I strongly suggest you get some rest before you fall over and crack your head open on my floor. I've already got one dead marshal on my conscience. I'd prefer not to add an unconscious seamstress to the list. Despite everything, Nora felt a smile tug at her lips. When you put it that way, rest does sound appealing. Sam led her down a short hallway to a small bedroom that was indeed spare, but clean. A simple bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a single window with curtains that had once been blue but were now faded to gray. It was nothing like her comfortable rooms above her shop, but it was safe and warm and blessedly horizontal. I'll heat some water for washing, Sam said. Give you some privacy to clean up before you sleep. There's a lock on the door if it makes you feel better, though I promise you're safe here. Wade's got ears like a wolf and sleeps light as a cat. Nobody's getting near this house without him knowing. Thank you, Sam, for everything. The old man nodded. You remind me of someone, he said quietly. Someone I wasn't able to help when she needed it. So maybe this is my chance to make that right. Before Nora could ask what he meant, he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Nora stood alone in the small room, the reality of her situation finally settling over her like a heavy blanket. 2 days ago, she'd been a respectable businesswoman with a shop and a reputation and a quiet, ordered life. Now she was a fugitive hiding in the mountains, pretending to be married to a man she barely knew, with her entire future dependent on bringing down one of the most powerful men in Wyoming. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear, she felt something else, something that surprised her. She felt alive. For 3 years, ever since fleeing Boston and the painful memories there, Nora had been playing it safe. Building her business, keeping her head down, making no waves, forming no deep attachments. She'd been existing, but not really living, going through the motions of a life without engaging with it fully. Fear had made her small, cautious, half-present in her own story. But now, with everything stripped away and death itself hunting her, she felt more present, more real, more here than she had in years. Every sense was heightened, every moment mattered, every choice carried weight. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also exhilarating in a strange, unexpected way. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Wade stood there with a bucket of warm water and a bundle of cloth. Sam heated this for you, and I found some of my old shirts that might work for sleeping. I'm afraid we don't have anything more appropriate for a lady, but they're perfect, Nora said, taking them. Thank you. Wade hesitated in the doorway as if there was something more he wanted to say. Finally, you did well today. Better than well. Most people would have fallen apart after what you've been through. You didn't. That takes strength. Or stupidity. I haven't decided which yet. Definitely strength. He turned to leave, then paused. Nora, we're going to get through this. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but we will. Blackstone will answer for what he's done, and you'll get your life back. I promise you that. Don't make promises you can't keep, Wade. I don't. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind him. Nora washed quickly with the warm water, scrubbing away 2 days of trail dirt and fear sweat. She changed into one of Wade's shirts, which hung on her like a dress, the sleeves extending well past her fingertips. It smelled like him, leather and wood smoke, and something else, something clean and masculine that made her feel oddly safe. She climbed into the bed, intending to think through everything that had happened, to plan for what came next. But the moment her head hit the pillow, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her last conscious thought was of gray eyes watching her in the moonlight, of strong hands steadying her, of a voice saying, "You're not alone in this." Then sleep took her under, deep and dreamless, and for the first time in 2 days, untroubled by nightmares. When Nora woke, the light coming through the window told her it was late afternoon. She'd slept nearly around the clock. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then memory crashed back, the gunshot, the flight, The ranch. Wade. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, which someone had cleaned and left folded on the chair, and ventured out of the bedroom. The main room was empty, but she could hear voices outside. Through the window, she saw Wade and Sam by the corral, working with a young horse. Wade moved with easy confidence, his hands gentle but firm as he ran them along the animal's flanks, talking to it in a low, soothing voice. Nora found herself watching him with interest. There was something compelling about the way he moved, the quiet competence he brought to everything he did. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, sure of his place in the world even when that place was constantly shifting. She was so absorbed in watching that she didn't hear the door open behind her until a voice said, "He's good with horses and people. Though I suspect he's better with the horses." Nora turned to find Sam entering with an armload of firewood. "How long have you known him?" "Since he first arrived in Wyoming. He hired me to help him set up the ranch, told me straight out what he really was and what he was doing here. Asked if I wanted in on bringing down corruption and criminals, or if I'd rather find work elsewhere." Sam stacked the wood by the fireplace. "I signed on. Been watching his back ever since." "Why? Why risk your life for this?" Sam was quiet for a moment, his weathered face distant. "I had a daughter once. She was working in a mining camp, cooking for the workers. One of the mine owner's sons took a shine to her, wouldn't take no for an answer. When she fought back, he had her arrested for theft, planted evidence in her room. She died in a territorial prison, sick and alone, while that bastard went on living his life like nothing happened." He looked at Nora, his eyes hard. "So when Wade Forrester told me he dedicated his life to bringing down men like that, rich, powerful men who think their money puts them above decency and law, I figured it was the least I could do for my girl's memory." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "That's a terrible thing to carry." "We all carry something, ma'am. The question is what we do with it. Wade?" He turned his pain into purpose. "I'm trying to do the same." The door opened and Wade came in, brushing dust from his hands. He stopped when he saw Nora, a smile breaking across his face. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I slept for a week." "Eat that. What time is it?" "Nearly 5 o'clock. You've been out for almost 20 hours. 20... Nora shook her head in disbelief. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sleep so long. Don't apologize. Your body needed it." Wade moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out ingredients. "I'm making dinner, nothing fancy, just stew, but you should eat something substantial." "I can help." "You can sit and keep me company while I cook. Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor." "No, but I've patched up enough wounded soldiers to know that rest and food are the best medicine. So sit." Nora sat, watching as Wade efficiently prepared the meal. Sam joined them, and the three of them fell into an easy conversation about the ranch, the cattle, the endless work that went into keeping such an operation running. It was surprisingly comfortable, almost domestic, and for brief moments Nora could almost forget that this was all pretend, that she was here not by choice, but by necessity. Over dinner, which was indeed simple but surprisingly good, Wade outlined his plan for the coming days. Tomorrow he'd start teaching Nora to shoot properly. The day after, he'd show her the escape routes and the places she could hide if danger came. Then, once he was certain the ranch was secure, he'd make the trip back to Silver Creek to search Marshal Hendrick's office and continue building the case against Blackstone. "How long will you be gone?" Nora asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of her voice. 3 days? Maybe 4? Sam will be here the entire time, and the ranch hands are always nearby. You won't be alone. But she would be without Wade, without the man who'd become her anchor in the storm. The thought of it made her chest tight with worry she didn't fully understand. After dinner, they sat by the fire while Sam taught Nora to play poker, using dried beans for currency. Wade watched with amusement as Nora, who claimed to have never played before, proceeded to win 3 hands in a row through what appeared to be either extraordinary luck or natural cunning. "You sure you've never played this game before?" Sam asked suspiciously after Nora cleaned him out yet again. "Never," Nora said innocently. "Though I did spend 3 years negotiating with suppliers and customers. I suppose reading people's intentions isn't that different from reading their cards." Wade laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his usually serious face. "I think Sam just met his match." I think Sam just got hustled by a seamstress, the old man grumbled, but his eyes were twinkling. As the evening wore on and the fire burned down to coals, Sam excused himself to check on the livestock one final time. Nora and Wade were left alone, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. "Thank you," Nora said finally. "For today. For letting me rest. For not pushing. For making this feel less like imprisonment and more like refuge. You're not a prisoner here, Nora. You're a guest who's had a terrible few days and deserves some peace. A guest who can't leave. A guest who's smart enough not to try until it's safe." Wade poked at the fire, sending up a small shower of sparks. "I meant what I said before. When this is over, you're free to go wherever you want. No strings, no obligations. I won't try to keep you here." "Why does that sound like you're trying to convince yourself as much as me?" Wade looked up, meeting her eyes across the firelight. "Because maybe I am." The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy with something neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Nora's heart beat faster, though she told herself it was just residual fear, just the intensity of the situation making her feel things that weren't real. "I should go to bed," she said, standing abruptly. "Tomorrow sounds like it will be demanding." "Nora." Wade stood too. "I need you to know something. What I told you before, about never forcing you to do anything against your will. I meant that. About everything. Not just leaving, but anything. If you're ever uncomfortable, if I ever overstep, you tell me immediately. Promise me that." Nora looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd offered her protection without asking for anything in return, whose eyes held shadows of old pain and iron determination. "I promise. And Wade, the same goes for you. If this arrangement, if having me here becomes a burden, you tell me. I'll figure something else out. You're not a burden." "You say that now. Ask me again after I've been underfoot for a month, driving you mad with my terrible cooking and my habit of singing while I work." "You sing?" "Constantly. Badly. My brother used to say I could clear a room faster than a skunk at a picnic." Wade's smile was soft, almost tender. "Somehow I doubt that. But I guess I'll find out." As Nora lay in bed that night, listening to the wind whisper around the eaves and the distant howl of coyotes, she thought about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been worried about finishing Mrs. Henderson's daughter's wedding dress on time. Now she was hiding in the mountains, pretending to be married, learning to shoot, and feeling things for her supposed husband that she had no business feeling. It was madness, all of it. But as she drifted off to sleep wearing Wade's shirt, surrounded by the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, Nora found herself smiling. She was alive. She was safe. And for the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow instead of just trying to survive it. That had to count for something. The sharp crack of gunfire split the morning air, and Nora's bullet struck the tree trunk a full 2 feet to the left of the tin can Wade had set up as a target. "You're anticipating the recoil," Wade said from his position just behind her left shoulder. "Don't tense up before you pull the trigger. Breathe out slowly and squeeze. Don't jerk." Nora lowered the pistol, her arms aching from holding the heavy weapon steady. They'd been at this for over an hour, and while her aim had improved marginally, she was still far from what anyone would call proficient. "I'm never going to be good at this." "You don't need to be good. You just need to be adequate enough to buy yourself time if trouble comes." Wade moved closer, adjusting her stance with gentle hands on her shoulders. "Try again. This time focus on the target, not the gun. Trust the weapon to do its job." Nora raised the pistol again, acutely aware of Wade's presence behind her, the warmth of his body close enough that she could feel it even through the cool morning air. She forced herself to concentrate on the tin can glinting in the sunlight, took a slow breath, and squeezed the trigger. The can went flying off its perch. "There!" Wade's voice was triumphant. "You see? You can do this. You just needed to get out of your own way." Nora stared at the now empty branch in disbelief, then looked down at the smoking pistol in her hands as if it had acted independently. "I hit it. You did indeed. Now do it 5 more times and I'll believe you've got the hang of it." She did, missing twice but hitting 3 more times, enough that Wade declared her minimally competent in self-defense. As they walked back toward the ranch house, Nora rolling her aching shoulders, Wade outlined the rest of the day's lessons. After lunch, I want to show you the escape routes. There are 3 paths out of this valley that most people don't know about. If something happens while I'm gone, if Blackstone's men somehow find this place, you need to know how to disappear into the mountains. You really think they could find us here? Wade's expression was serious. I think Conrad Blackstone is a man who doesn't like loose ends, and right now you're the loosest end he has. He'll spend whatever it takes, use whatever resources he has to track you down. So yes, I think it's possible, which is why you need to be prepared. The thought sent a chill down Nora's spine despite the warming day. She'd allowed herself to relax slightly over the past few days, lulled by the peaceful routine of ranch life and the growing sense of safety that came from being in Wade's presence. But Wade was right. The danger hadn't passed. It had just momentarily paused. They found Sam in his kitchen preparing lunch, and the 3 of them ate together while discussing the ranch's operations. Sam mentioned that one of the hands had asked about meeting Wade's new wife, and Wade had put him off by saying Nora was still recovering from the journey and wasn't feeling up to visitors. Can't avoid it forever, Sam pointed out. The boys are curious. Natural enough when their boss suddenly has a wife nobody knew about. I know, Wade said. Maybe in a few more days. I want to make sure Nora's comfortable with the story before we start introducing complications. I'm sitting right here, Nora interjected. You can ask me directly how I feel about meeting the ranch hands. Wade had the grace to look chagrined. You're right, I apologize. Nora, how do you feel about meeting the men who work here? Terrified, she said honestly, but also aware that it's necessary if we want this cover story to hold. When do you think we should do it? Tomorrow, maybe. I can have them coming up to the house for dinner, introduce you properly. It'll seem natural. A new bride wanting to meet her husband's employees, make them feel welcome. And if they ask questions I don't know how to answer, defer to me. Say you're not familiar with ranch operations yet, or that I haven't explained that part to you. Newlyweds don't know everything about each other. It's expected that there will be gaps. Wade paused, then added, and if anyone makes you uncomfortable or asks questions that feel intrusive, you have my permission to be as cold as ice. You're a city woman, educated, used to better society. It would be more suspicious if you were completely comfortable with rough ranch hands than if you maintained a certain distance. After lunch, true to his word, Wade took Nora up into the mountains behind the ranch. They climbed for the better part of an hour, Wade pointing out landmarks and markers along the way. A lightning-struck pine, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, a creek that flowed year-round even in drought. The first escape route led through a narrow canyon that opened onto a series of caves. There's food and supplies cached in the largest cave, Wade explained. Enough for a week if you're careful. From there, you can either hole up and wait for me to come get you, or you can continue north over the ridge to a trading post run by a man named Mackenzie. He's ex-Pinkerton, retired after taking a bullet in the leg. If you tell him you're Wade Forrester's wife, he'll help you no questions asked. And if something's happened to you, if you don't come, Wade met her eyes steadily. If I don't come within 3 days, assume the worst and go to Mackenzie. He'll get you to the territorial marshal in Helena. Tell them everything about Blackstone, about Hendricks, about me. They'll know what to do. The casual way he discussed his own potential death made Nora's stomach clench. Wade, I'm not planning on dying, Nora. But in this work, you prepare for every possibility. That's how you survive. The second route was even more treacherous, a steep climb that required sure footing and no fear of heights. It led to an old trapper's cabin that Sam kept supplied. This one's harder to reach, Wade said, but it's also harder to find. If you need to really disappear, this is where you come. The third route was the most dangerous, but also the fastest. A trail that skirted the edge of a cliff before dropping down into a canyon that led directly to the main road. Only use this one if you're being actively pursued and need to reach civilization quickly, Wade warned. It's exposed, visible from the valley, and one wrong step could be fatal. By the time they returned to the ranch, Nora's head was spinning with information. Landmarks, distances, cached supplies, names of people she'd never met who might or might not help her if everything went wrong. She felt overwhelmed and underprepared, like a child being asked to navigate by stars she couldn't yet name. I know it's a lot, Wade said, reading her expression as they approached the house. But you're smart, Nora. You'll remember when you need to. And if I don't? If I panic and forget everything? Then you do what you did in Silver Creek. You improvise and survive. You've already proven you're capable of that. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Nora found herself studying Wade more openly than she had before. He'd removed his gun belt and rolled up his sleeves, and there was something intimate about seeing him in this relaxed state, the hard edges of the professional lawman softened by firelight and evening quiet. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. Wade looked up from the leather strap he'd been oiling. "You can ask. I reserve the right not to answer." "Fair enough." Nora chose her words carefully. "Sam mentioned that you turned your pain into purpose. What did he mean by that?" For a long moment, Wade was silent, his hand still on the leather. Nora thought he might refuse to answer, might deflect or change the subject. Then he set down his work and leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the flames. "I was engaged once," he said quietly. "Her name was Elizabeth. We were going to marry as soon as I mustered out of the cavalry. She was a school teacher in a small town in Kansas, smart and kind and patient enough to wait for a soldier who was gone more than he was home." Nora's heart clenched at the past tense. "What happened?" "A local land baron wanted her school building for his own purposes. When the town refused to sell, he had his men burn it down one night. Elizabeth was inside, working late, preparing lessons." Wade's voice was flat, emotionless, but Nora could see the white-knuckle grip he had on the arms of his chair. "She died in that fire. The man responsible claimed it was an accident, paid off the local sheriff, and walked away without facing any consequences." "Oh, Wade, I'm so sorry." That's when I realized that all my years in the cavalry, all the fighting and bleeding I'd done in the name of protecting people, it didn't matter if the real threats came from men with money and influence instead of rifles and arrows. So I joined the Pinkertons. I made it my mission to bring down men like him, powerful men who think their wealth puts them above the law and human decency. "Did you ever catch him? The man who killed Elizabeth?" Wade's smile was cold and hard. "That was my first assignment. Took me 8 months, but I built a case so thorough that even his high-priced lawyers couldn't get him acquitted. He died in a territorial prison 3 years into a 20-year sentence. Pneumonia, they said, but I suspect it was more complicated than that. Turns out rich men don't fare well in prison when their money can't buy them protection anymore." Nora absorbed this, understanding now the depths of Wade's dedication to his work. This wasn't just a job for him. It was a crusade, a way of making meaning from tragedy. "Is that why you helped me? Because I reminded you of her?" "No," Wade said firmly, looking at her directly. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Because you witnessed an evil act and deserved protection. Because leaving you to face Blackstone alone would have made me complicit in your murder." He paused. "You don't remind me of Elizabeth, Nora. She was gentle and soft-spoken, always seeing the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. You're different, stronger in some ways, more willing to fight." "I don't feel very strong." "Because you don't recognize your own courage. You climbed a rope while being shot at. You've adapted to circumstances that would break most people. You shot a pistol today, even though you were terrified of it. That's strength, Nora, even if it doesn't feel like it from the inside." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. After a while, Sam came in from his evening rounds and announced he was turning in early. He bid them good night and disappeared into his small room off the kitchen, leaving Wade and Nora alone by the dying fire. "I should probably sleep too," Nora said, though she found herself reluctant to leave. There was something peaceful about this moment, sitting here with Wade in the firelit room while the wind whispered outside and the logs settled with soft pops and crackles. "Nora, there's something else we need to discuss," Wade said, and the seriousness in his tone made her pause. "Something about the cover story that we haven't addressed yet." "What's that?" Wade seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Married couples. They share certain intimacies, physical closeness that people notice. If we're going to convince the ranch hands and anyone else we meet that this marriage is real, we need to be comfortable with casual touches. A hand on the shoulder, standing close together, that sort of thing." Nora felt her cheeks warm. "You mean we need to act like we're affectionate?" "Not excessively so. But yes, some degree of physical comfort with each other. Right now, we're careful to maintain distance, to avoid even accidental contact. Newlyweds wouldn't be that cautious around each other. He was right, of course. Nora had noticed it herself, the way they both made sure not to touch unnecessarily, the careful space they maintained between them. It was the behavior of strangers, not spouses. "So what do you suggest?" she asked. Wade stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me." "What?" "There's no music, I know. But if we can be comfortable moving together, touching in a dance, it'll be easier to be casual about it in other situations." When she hesitated, he added, "It's just a dance, Nora. Nothing more." Nora placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. He positioned her properly, one hand in his, the other on his shoulder, his free hand resting lightly on her waist. Even through the layers of fabric, she could feel the warmth of his palm, the strength in his fingers. "No music," she pointed out. "Then we'll have to imagine it. What song would you choose?" Nora thought for a moment. "My mother used to sing an old Irish ballad, 'The Water is Wide.' Do you know it?" "I do." Wade began to move, slow and easy, guiding her in a simple waltz pattern around the room. He hummed the melody, his voice surprisingly pleasant, and Nora found herself relaxing into the movement, following his lead. They circled the room once, twice, 3 times, and with each rotation Nora became more aware of every point of contact between them, his hand warm against her waist, his calloused palm rough against her own, the solid presence of his shoulder under her hand. He smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else, something clean and masculine that made her want to lean closer. "You're a good dancer," she said softly. "Cavalry balls. Had to learn or risk being a wallflower at every social function." His gray eyes held hers. "You're not bad yourself." "My father insisted on lessons, said a young lady needed to know how to comport herself in society." "Smart man." They continued dancing even though the song and Wade's humming had ended, moving now in silence broken only by the whisper of Nora's skirts and the soft creak of floorboards. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in deep shadow, and Nora found herself thinking that this moment felt suspended somehow, existing outside of normal time. "This is nice," she heard herself say. "I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I." Wade's voice was low, intimate in the darkness. "I'd forgotten how much I missed it." Nora looked up at him, at the strong line of his jaw and the shadows in his eyes, at the way the faint light caught in his dark hair. He was handsome, she realized with a start, not in the conventional way of clean-shaven gentlemen in fine suits, but in a rougher, more elemental way that spoke of hard living and harder choices. And more than handsome, he was good. Truly, deeply good in a way that had nothing to do with following rules and everything to do with following conscience. Wade seemed to realize the same moment she did that they'd stopped moving, that they were simply standing in the middle of the room holding each other, the pretense of dancing abandoned. His hand on her waist tightened almost imperceptibly, and Nora's breath caught as she saw something shift in his expression, saw the careful control he maintained slip just slightly. "Nora," he said, and her name on his lips was almost a question. She should step back. She should put distance between them, remind them both that this was pretend, that none of it was real, but she found she didn't want to. She wanted to stay exactly where she was, wanted to see what might happen if she let this moment continue. The door banged open and Sam burst in, his face grim. "Riders coming up the valley, 4 of them, moving fast." The spell shattered. Wade released Nora immediately, his entire demeanor shifting from man to soldier in the space of a heartbeat. "How far?" 10 minutes, maybe less. I saw them from the ridge." "Blackstone's men?" "Can't tell in this light, but I'm not inclined to assume the best." Wade was already moving, grabbing his gun belt, checking his rifle. "Nora, go to your room and lock the door. Sam, douse the lamps. Make it look like we've all gone to bed." "What are you going to do?" Nora asked, fear spiking through her. "Find out who they are and what they want. If they're just travelers looking for shelter, I'll send them on their way. If they're trouble," he met her eyes, "stay in your room no matter what you hear. Promise me." "Wade, promise me, Nora." "I promise." She fled to her room, her heart hammering, and locked the door as instructed. Through the small window, she could see nothing but darkness and the faint shape of mountains against the star-strewn sky. She pressed her ear to the door, listening. Voices outside, men calling out greetings. Wade's voice responding, casual and unconcerned. Then the sounds of boots on the porch, the front door opening. "Sorry to bother you so late," an unfamiliar voice said. "We're tracking a woman, dangerous criminal, wanted for murder. Name of Nora Callan. You seen anyone fitting her description pass through?" Nora's blood turned to ice. They were here. Blackstone's men had found her. Murder? Wade's voice held just the right note of surprise and concern. "What'd she do?" "Killed a U.S. Marshal in Silver Creek few days back. Shot him in cold blood, then fled. There's a substantial reward for her capture. $500 alive, $300 dead. That's a lot of money for one woman." "She's dangerous, mister. Don't let the lady part fool you. You see her, you send word immediately to Conrad Blackstone at the Silver Creek Mining Company. He's posted the reward personally." There was a pause, and Nora could imagine Wade pretending to consider this information. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "Can't say I've seen any women traveling alone. But then, I've been out working the north pasture most days. My wife might have seen something from the house, though. You want me to ask her?" Nora's heart nearly stopped. What was Wade doing? "You're married?" The man sounded skeptical. 3 months now. She just arrived from Denver last week, still getting used to ranch life." "Convenient timing." "Not sure what you mean by that." Wade's voice hardened slightly. "You calling my wife a criminal?" "Easy, friend. Just being thorough. Mind if we speak to her, just to ask if she's seen anything?" "She's sleeping. Had a rough day. This country's harder than what she's used to. I'd rather not wake her unless it's urgent." "It's urgent enough. Murder of a federal marshal is serious business." Nora heard Wade's footsteps approaching her door. Her mind raced. What should she do? If she refused to come out, it would look suspicious. But if she showed her face to these men, would they recognize her? A gentle knock. "Darling, there are some men here who need to ask you a question." "I'm sorry to wake you." Nora opened the door a crack, keeping the chain engaged. In the dim light from the main room, she could see Wade's face, and the message in his eyes was clear. "Trust me. Follow my lead." She unlatched the chain and opened the door fully. Wade immediately put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close against his side in a protective gesture that looked entirely natural. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. These gentlemen are looking for a fugitive. They want to know if you've seen any strange women around the ranch." Nora allowed herself to lean into Wade's warmth, playing the sleepy, confused newlywed. "What? What's happening?" One of the men stepped forward into the light, and Nora's breath caught. She recognized him, one of the miners from Blackstone's operation, a man she'd seen in town but never spoken to. If he recognized her, "Ma'am, we're sorry to disturb you," he said, studying her face intently. "We're looking for a woman named Nora Callan, brown hair, about your height and build. She's wanted for killing a marshal in Silver Creek. You seen anyone like that around here?" Nora forced herself to meet his eyes, to not look away or show fear. No, I haven't seen anyone. We're quite isolated here. Mr. Bridger mentioned some supply wagons passed on the main road earlier this week, but I didn't see any women with them." The man continued staring at her, and Nora felt Wade's arm tighten almost imperceptibly around her shoulders. The moment stretched out, tense and dangerous. Finally, the man nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. Sorry to wake you." He turned back to Wade. "You'll keep an eye out? Send word if you see anything?" "Of course," Wade said. "Always happy to help the law. Though I hope you catch her soon. Don't like the idea of a murderess running around with my wife here." "We'll catch her," the man said grimly. "Mr. Blackstone's offering too much money for her to stay hidden long. Someone will turn her in soon enough." Wade walked them to the door, maintaining that perfect balance of helpful neighbor and protective husband. Nora stayed where she was, forcing herself to breathe normally, to not collapse until they were gone. She heard the men mount their horses, heard the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Still, she didn't move, didn't dare believe they were really safe. Wade closed and barred the door, then turned to her. The careful mask he'd worn slipped, and she saw the fear he'd been hiding. "Are you all right?" "He looked right at me. He looked at my face and didn't know me." The light was dim, you were half asleep, and you were in the last place they'd expect to find you, standing beside your husband in your own home. They were looking for Nora Callan, fugitive and spinster. They saw Mrs. Forrester, rancher's wife. Wade crossed to her, taking her hands. But this changes things. If they're searching this far out, asking at every ranch and homestead, it's only a matter of time before someone makes a connection or gets suspicious. What do we do? Wade was quiet for a long moment, his thumb absently stroking the back of her hand. When he looked up, his expression was resolved. We make it real. What? The marriage. We make it legally binding. He spoke quickly, urgently. Think about it, Nora. Right now, our story is good, but ultimately verifiable as false. If anyone digs deep enough, checks records in Denver, they'll find no marriage license, no certificate. But if we actually get married, here, quietly, with just Sam as witness, then there's nothing to find. You become Mrs. Wade Forrester not just in story, but in law. And the law protects wives. You couldn't be compelled to testify against me, and I couldn't be compelled to give you up. We'd have legal protection on top of the cover story. Nora's head spun. You're asking me to actually marry you? I'm suggesting a legal arrangement that benefits us both. It wouldn't be a real marriage, not in the ways that matter. You'd have your own room, your own life. When this is over and Blackstone is dealt with, we can quietly get an annulment or divorce. But until then, being my wife, my actual wife, would give you a layer of protection we can't get any other way. This is insane. It's practical. It's insane, Nora repeated, but even as she said it, she could see the logic. Could see how much safer she'd be with legal marriage protecting her. How much harder it would be for anyone to question her identity or Wade's right to shelter her. Sam had been standing silently in the shadows, but now he spoke. Boy's right, ma'am. Those men will be back, or others like them. And next time they might ask harder questions, look more closely. But a man's wife is his business. Law's funny about that. Respects the sanctity of marriage even when it don't respect much else. But to actually marry someone I barely know, you'd be marrying someone who's already proven he'll protect you with his life, Wade said quietly. Someone who's asking for nothing except the chance to keep you safe. I meant what I said before, Nora. This changes nothing about your freedom. When it's over, you go where you want. I'll even pay for the divorce proceedings if that's what you choose. Nora pulled her hands from his and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness where danger had just ridden away. Everything in her upbringing, every lesson about propriety and caution, screamed that this was madness. You didn't marry strangers. You didn't enter into legal contracts based on a few days' acquaintance. You didn't bind your life to a man simply because the alternative was death. But then, you also didn't watch federal marshals get murdered. You didn't flee into the mountains with bounty hunters on your trail. You didn't learn to shoot pistols and memorize escape routes. Normal rules didn't apply anymore. Normal life was gone. She turned back to Wade, who stood watching her with those steady gray eyes, waiting for her answer without pressure or manipulation, just offering a solution and letting her choose. If we do this, she said slowly, I need conditions. Name them. First, this is purely for protection. We maintain separate rooms, separate lives as much as possible. This is a legal arrangement, not a romantic one. Agreed. Second, when this is over, when Blackstone is dealt with and I'm safe, you help me establish a new life somewhere. A shop, a house, enough money to start over. I won't walk away from this marriage with nothing. I'll do better than that. I'll give you half of everything I own right now. This ranch, my savings, all of it. If you're taking this risk for my investigation, you deserve compensation. I don't want your ranch, but you'll have legal right to it as my wife. Consider it insurance. Wade stepped closer. Any other conditions? Nora thought hard, trying to imagine what she might be agreeing to, what complications might arise. You can't. That is, I need your word that you won't expect marital relations, that you'll treat me as a partner, not property. Nora, I would never... Wade stopped, took a breath, started again. You have my word. On my honor, on Elizabeth's memory, on everything I hold sacred. This marriage is for protection and legality only. I will never touch you with anything but respect. She believed him. God help her, she believed him utterly. All right, she heard herself say. Let's do it. Let's get married. The words hung in the air, impossible, and yet somehow inevitable. Wade nodded once, sharp and decisive. I'll ride into town first thing tomorrow and find a minister or justice of the peace who'll perform a quiet ceremony. We'll need a witness. Sam can do that. We'll have it done before those men come back with more questions. How romantic, Nora said with a slightly hysterical laugh. Married in haste to avoid being murdered. I'll add it to the list of wedding stories that never get told at anniversaries. Despite everything, Nora smiled. Then the full weight of what she'd agreed to hit her, and she had to sit down abruptly. She was going to marry Wade Forrester. Actually, legally marry him. Bind her life to his in the eyes of God and law. It was terrifying and surreal, and somehow, underneath the fear, there was a strange sense of rightness to it. Wade knelt in front of her chair, looking up into her face. You're sure about this? Because once we do it, we can't undo it quickly. There's no easy way back. I'm not sure about anything anymore, Nora admitted. But I trust you, Wade. I don't fully understand why, but I do. So yes, I'm sure. As sure as I can be about anything in this nightmare my life has become. He took her hand and kissed it, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it made her breath catch. Then tomorrow, Nora Callan becomes Nora Forrester. And God help Conrad Blackstone when he realizes he's not just hunting a witness anymore, he's threatening a Pinkerton agent's wife. The wedding took place 3 days later in the ranch house living room, with only Sam as witness and a tired-looking justice of the peace named Whitmore, who asked no questions and seemed grateful for the $20 gold piece Wade pressed into his palm. Nora wore the cleanest dress she had, the same one she'd been wearing the night she fled Silver Creek, now mended and washed but still showing signs of hard use. She'd tried to do something with her hair, pinning it up in a style that felt appropriate for a bride, but her hands had shaken so badly that Sam had finally stepped in, his weathered fingers surprisingly gentle as he helped arrange the pins. My daughter used to wear it like this, he'd said quietly. You look real fine, ma'am. Now she stood beside Wade in front of Justice Whitmore, acutely aware that this moment should feel momentous, but instead felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold from a great distance. Wade had changed into clean clothes and shaved, transforming from rugged rancher into someone who looked almost civilized, though nothing could hide the dangerous competence that radiated from him like heat from a forge. Dearly beloved, Whitmore began in a voice that suggested he'd said these words 1,000 times before and would say them 1,000 more. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The traditional words washed over Nora, words about love and cherishing honor and faithfulness, for better or worse, in sickness and health till death did them part. She tried to focus on them, to treat this moment with the gravity it deserved, but her mind kept drifting to the absurdity of the situation. She was marrying a man she'd known for less than 2 weeks, marrying him to avoid being murdered, standing in a borrowed living room wearing a torn dress while her actual life lay in ruins 100 miles away. Do you, Wade Forrester, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Wade's voice was steady, certain, as if he made vows like this every day. And do you, Nora Callan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Nora opened her mouth and found her throat had closed. She swallowed hard, forced the words out. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Whitmore closed his worn Bible with a thump. You may kiss the bride. Wade looked at Nora, a question in his eyes. She gave the smallest nod, and he leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief and chaste, and somehow still managed to send heat racing through her veins. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Nora saw something there she couldn't quite name, something that made her heart stutter in her chest. Congratulations, Whitmore said, already gathering his things. I'll file the certificate with the territorial office, should be official within the week. After he left, escorted by Sam, who wanted to make sure he didn't linger or ask questions, Nora and Wade stood alone in the suddenly too quiet room. The simple gold band Wade had produced from somewhere now circled Nora's finger, foreign and heavy and undeniably real. Well, Wade said finally, that's done. Yes. Nora twisted the ring, unable to stop touching it. I'm married. We're married, Wade corrected gently. This affects both of us, Nora. You're not alone in this. I know, She trailed off, unsure how to explain the tangle of emotions knotting her chest, relief that she now had legal protection, fear of what this meant, guilt that Wade had tied himself to her problems, and underneath it all, something else, something warm and unsettling that she refused to examine too closely. Wade moved to the window, looking out at the ranch yard where evening shadows were beginning to lengthen. I need to leave tomorrow. Go to Silver Creek and search Hendrick's office before Blackstone has a chance to destroy whatever evidence might be there. How long will you be gone? 3 days? Maybe 4? Sam will stay here with you the entire time. The ranch hands know to stay away from the house unless specifically called. You'll be safe. You keep saying that, but those men found us once. What's to stop them from coming back? Nothing, Wade admitted. Which is why you need to stay alert. Keep your pistol loaded and within reach. If anyone approaches the house, you get to the root cellar and stay there until Sam gives you the all clear. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to fight. You hide and you wait. The thought of Wade leaving, of being here without him while danger circled ever closer, made Nora's stomach churn with anxiety, but she forced herself to nod calmly. I understand. Go do what you need to do. I'll be fine. Wade turned from the window, studying her face. You don't have to pretend with me, Nora. I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared. But scared doesn't mean incapable. You've proven that already. Have I? Because right now I feel like I'm barely holding myself together. That's because you're smart enough to understand the danger. Fools feel no fear because they can't comprehend consequences. He crossed to her, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You're going to be all right. I promise you that. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was tender, almost intimate, and Nora found herself frozen by it. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. That night, lying alone in her small room with her new wedding ring catching moonlight from the window, Nora tried to make sense of what she'd done. She'd married a stranger. Actually, legally married him. She was Mrs. Wade Forrester now, bound to him by law and vow and a kiss that had lasted barely a second but somehow felt branded into her memory. She should feel trapped. She should feel like she'd made a terrible mistake. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to safe. As if by speaking those vows, by sliding this ring onto her finger, Wade had wrapped her in armor that even Conrad Blackstone's money and influence couldn't penetrate. It was an illusion, she knew. Paper and promises couldn't stop bullets. But illusions could be powerful things when you needed them badly enough. Morning came too quickly. Nora rose to find Wade already up, loading supplies onto his horse while Sam watched from the porch. She'd meant to stay inside, to say goodbye with appropriate distance and propriety. Instead, she found herself walking out into the cool dawn air, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. Wade looked up as she approached, something softening in his expression. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. She watched him check his saddle rigging, his movements efficient and practiced. Be careful, Wade. Please. I'm always careful. He secured the last strap, then turned to face her fully. Remember what I taught you. If there's trouble, don't try to be a hero. Run, hide, survive. That's the only thing that matters. And if something happens to you, then you follow the plan. 3 days, and if I haven't returned, you go to Mackenzie. He'll get you somewhere safe. Wade hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his jacket. This is a letter to my contact in the Pinkerton office in Denver. It explains everything, who you are, what you witnessed, what I've been investigating. If I don't come back, you give this to Mackenzie and he'll make sure it reaches the right people. Nora took the letter with trembling hands. You really think something might happen to you? I think Conrad Blackstone is a dangerous man who's already killed a federal marshal to protect his secrets. I think going back to Silver Creek is a risk. But it's a risk worth taking if it means we can bring him down. Wade studied her face, then did something unexpected. He pulled her into a brief, tight embrace. I'll come back, Nora. I swear it. She clung to him for just a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and wood smoke, letting herself draw strength from his solid presence. Then she stepped back, forcing herself to release him. Go. And Wade, don't make me a widow before I've properly learned to be a wife. His laugh was surprised and genuine. Yes, ma'am. I'll do my best. She watched him ride away until he disappeared into the trees, then stood there staring at the empty trail long after the sound of hoofbeats had faded. Sam came to stand beside her, his weathered face creased with concern. He'll be all right, the old man said. Boys survived worse than this. You sound very certain. I've known Wade Forrester for 2 years. In that time, I've seen him face down outlaws, survive ambushes, and walk into situations that would make grown men weep. He's smart, he's careful, and he's meaner than a rattlesnake when he needs to be. Sam paused. But more than that, he's got something to come back to now. That makes a man fight harder. Nora looked at him sharply. You mean the investigation? I mean you, ma'am. Don't think I haven't noticed the way he looks at you when you're not watching, or the way you look at him for that matter. Sam, this marriage is just for protection. Maybe it started that way, but I've seen plenty of marriages in my time, and I know the difference between legal arrangements and something real. You two might have started out pretending, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being pretend. At least for him it has. Nora wanted to argue, to insist that Sam was reading too much into simple kindness and proximity, but the words died in her throat because deep down, she feared he might be right. And more terrifying than that, she feared what it might mean if he was. The first day without Wade passed slowly. Nora tried to keep herself busy, helping Sam with small tasks around the ranch, attempting to cook dinner with mixed results, anything to keep her mind from wandering to Silver Creek and the dangers Wade might be facing. But every sound made her jump, every shadow seemed threatening, and by the time evening fell, she was wound so tight she thought she might shatter at a loud noise. The second day was worse. Storm clouds gathered in the afternoon, turning the sky bruised and ominous. The temperature dropped, and rain began to fall in fat, heavy drops that quickly became a downpour. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and lightning split the sky with brilliant white cracks that left afterimages on Nora's vision. She stood at the window watching the storm, her new wedding ring turning round and round on her finger. Wade had been gone 2 days. One more day, and if he didn't return, she was supposed to run. Supposed to abandon this place and the fragile safety it represented, trust her survival to a man she'd never met and a plan she didn't fully understand. Mrs. Forrester, Sam's voice from behind her was urgent. We've got riders coming, 4 of them, moving fast despite the rain. Nora's blood turned to ice. Is it Wade? Can't tell yet, but we're not taking chances. Root cellar now. She grabbed her pistol from the table and followed Sam through the kitchen to the trapdoor that led to the underground storage. He lifted it, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Get down there and don't make a sound, Sam ordered. I'll see who it is. If it's trouble, I'll lead them away from the house. You stay hidden, no matter what you hear. Understand? Sam, if they're dangerous. I'm an old man, ma'am. They won't see me as a threat. Now go, quickly. Nora climbed down into the cellar, her heart hammering. She heard the trapdoor close above her, heard Sam's footsteps moving away. Then silence, broken only by the drum of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. She waited in the darkness, pistol clutched in her shaking hands, and counted her heartbeats. 100, 200, 300. How long had it been? Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to have stopped meaning anything in the suffocating blackness. Then she heard it, voices above, muffled by wood and distance, but unmistakably angry. A crash, as if furniture had been overturned. Sam's voice, raised in protest. Another voice, cold and commanding, asking questions she couldn't quite make out. They were searching the house. Nora pressed herself into the corner of the cellar, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her finger found the trigger of her pistol, and she remembered Wade's lessons. Breathe slowly. Don't anticipate the recoil. Aim center mass. She could do this if she had to. She could defend herself. Footsteps directly above her head. Someone was in the kitchen, moving slowly, methodically. She heard drawers being opened, the clatter of pots and pans. Then the footsteps stopped, directly over the trapdoor. What's down here? The voice was unfamiliar, rough with a hint of an accent she couldn't place. Root cellar, Sam replied. his voice closer now. Just stores, potatoes, preserves, that sort of thing. Open it. Now hold on. The sound of a gun being cocked. I said open it. Nora's breath stopped entirely. She raised her pistol, aiming at where she thought the trap door would be, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the weapon steady. This was it. They'd find her, and she'd have to shoot or be taken. Wade had taught her to defend herself, but could she actually pull the trigger? Could she take a life to save her own? The trapdoor lifted slightly, a crack of light appearing. Nora's finger tightened on the trigger. Then a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. That's enough. We're leaving. But the cellar. I said we're leaving. The woman's not here, and we're wasting time. The trapdoor dropped shut with a bang that made Nora flinch. She heard arguing voices, heard Sam's protests, heard the sounds of men leaving the house. Then silence again, stretching out endlessly while she crouched in the darkness, trying to remember how to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the trapdoor opened again. Mrs. Forrester? They're gone. You can come up now. Nora climbed the ladder on shaking legs, emerging into a kitchen that had been thoroughly ransacked. Drawers hung open, their contents spilled across the floor. Chairs were overturned. The careful order of the house had been violated, transformed into chaos. Sam stood in the middle of the destruction, blood trickling from a split lip. I'm sorry, ma'am. I tried to keep them out, but are you all right? Nora set down her pistol and moved to him, examining his injury. What did they do to you? Just a little rough handling, nothing an old soldier can't handle. He winced as she touched his lip. They were looking for you specifically, described you perfectly. Said they knew you'd been here, that someone had seen you. But they left. Why did they leave without checking the cellar? I don't know. The one who stopped them, he was different from the others. Better dressed, smarter. He looked around the kitchen and said you weren't here, said they were wasting time. Sam's expression was troubled. It was almost like he knew you were hiding, but chose not to look, like he wanted them to leave without finding you. That made no sense. Why would one of Blackstone's men protect her? Unless… Sam, what did he look like? The one who called them off? Tall, dark hair going gray at the temples, had a scar across his left cheek. Fancy coat, spoke like an educated man. Why? Nora shook her head, filing the description away. I don't know, but something's not right here. They spent the rest of the evening cleaning up the mess and securing the house as best they could. Sam insisted on keeping watch through the night, refusing to sleep despite his injuries. Nora tried to rest but found it impossible, lying in her bed fully clothed with her pistol on the nightstand, starting at every sound. When dawn finally came on the third day, bringing weak sunlight through dissipating storm clouds, Nora felt as if she'd aged a decade overnight. Today was the deadline. If Wade didn't return by nightfall, she was supposed to run. Leave this place, leave Sam, leave the fragile sense of home she'd been building here. She was packing a small bag of essentials when she heard it, a single horse moving fast up the valley trail. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed her pistol and moved to the window, then felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. Wade. He looked exhausted, his clothes muddy and torn, his face drawn with fatigue. But he was alive, he was whole, and he was home. Nora flew out the door before she could think better of it, running across the muddy yard. Wade dismounted in time to catch her as she crashed into him, her arms going around his neck in an embrace that had nothing to do with pretense and everything to do with raw, overwhelming relief. I thought, when they came yesterday, I thought… She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the terror that had gripped her. Wade's arms tightened around her, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. I'm here. I'm all right. It's over. They ransacked the house. They were looking for me. I know. I saw them on the road, had to take a different route back to avoid them. He pulled back slightly, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes scanning her face urgently. Did they hurt you? Did they find you? No. Sam hid me in the cellar, but Wade, one of them, he stopped the others from checking the cellar. It was like he knew I was there but didn't want them to find me. Wade's expression grew sharp, intent. Describe him. She repeated Sam's description, and something changed in Wade's face. Recognition, followed by a flicker of what might have been hope. God, it can't be. What? Who is he? If I'm right, he's someone I thought was dead. Someone who can help us. Wade took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. Come inside. There's a lot I need to tell you, and not much time to do it. Blackstone knows I'm investigating him. He's accelerating his plans. Whatever he's been building toward, it's happening soon. We need to move fast. Inside, while Sam tended to Wade's horse and stood watch, Wade laid out what he discovered in Silver Creek. Marshall Hendricks had been investigating a massive gun-running operation that used Blackstone's mining company as a cover. Weapons were being smuggled through the mines and sold to renegade tribes and outlaw gangs throughout the territory. The profits were astronomical, and the corruption went higher than anyone had suspected, involving territorial officials, military officers, even someone in the governor's office. Hendricks had proof, Wade said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. I found his notes hidden in his boarding house, sewn into his mattress. Names, dates, shipment records, everything. It's enough to bring down not just Blackstone, but a dozen other powerful men. So we can go to the authorities now? End this? We could, if we could trust the authorities. But half the lawmen in this territory are on Blackstone's payroll. We need to get this evidence to someone beyond his reach, someone in the federal government who can't be bought or intimidated. Wade's expression was grim. I sent a telegram to my Pinkerton contact in Denver. He's arranging for us to meet with a federal prosecutor in Helena. But we need to get there, and Blackstone's men are watching every road. How do we get there safely? We don't take the roads. There's a trail through the mountains, hard to follow, dangerous in places, but it comes out near Helena. It'll take us 4 days of hard riding, but we'll avoid any search parties. Wade looked at her seriously. Nora, this is going to be difficult. The trail is rough, and we'll be exposed to the weather. But if we can make it to Helena, if we can get this evidence to the prosecutor, it's over. Blackstone goes to prison, and you're free. When do we leave? Tonight, as soon as it's dark. The less notice we give anyone, the better. He paused. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more time to prepare. I know this isn't what you signed up for. I signed up for survival, Nora said firmly. And if riding through mountains in the dark is what it takes, then that's what I'll do. Something in Wade's expression softened, shifted into something that made Nora's breath catch. You're extraordinary, you know that. Most women would have broken under this pressure, but you just keep fighting. I had a good teacher. She touched his hand briefly. You should rest while you can. You look like you haven't slept in days. I haven't, but I will, for a few hours. He stood, gathering the papers. Nora, thank you for trusting me, for not running when you had every reason to, for being strong enough to see this through. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting. The words came out more emotionally charged than she'd intended, and she saw Wade's eyes widen slightly. I know what you mean. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, see the exhaustion etched in every line of his face. When this is over, when you're safe, we need to talk about things we've both been avoiding. What things? Things that have nothing to do with investigations or protection or pretend marriages. His hand came up, his knuckles brushing her cheek in a gesture so tender it made her heart stutter. Things that are becoming very real for me, whether I intended them to or not. Before Nora could respond, before she could even process what he was saying, Wade turned and walked away, heading to his room to grab what little sleep he could before their desperate flight. Nora stood alone in the kitchen, her fingers pressed to her cheek where he'd touched her, her mind reeling. What was happening between them? When had the pretense started becoming reality? And more importantly, what would it mean if they survived this nightmare only to discover that the marriage they'd entered for protection had somehow, impossibly, become something neither of them could walk away from? She had no answers. But as she began packing supplies for their journey, as darkness fell and danger drew closer with every passing hour, Nora found herself thinking not about survival or escape or even freedom. She found herself thinking about gray eyes and gentle touches, about a man who'd promised to protect her and had given her something far more valuable, a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be fought for. They left the ranch under cover of darkness, riding 2 horses loaded with supplies and Marshall Hendricks' evidence wrapped in oilcloth and secured in Wade's saddlebags. Sam stood on the porch watching them go, his weathered face grave in the lamplight, one hand raised in silent farewell. Nora looked back once and saw him there, a solitary figure growing smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed him entirely. The mountain trail Wade chose was barely more than a game path, narrow and treacherous, winding upward through dense forest where branches clawed at their clothes and the horses picked their way carefully over roots and rocks. Wade led, his figure a dark shape ahead of her, occasionally turning to check that she was still following. Neither spoke, both too focused on the difficult terrain and too aware that voices carried in the night air. They climbed for hours, the elevation making Nora's ears pop and her breathing labored. The temperature dropped steadily, and she was grateful for the heavy coat Wade had insisted she wear. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses in a small clearing where a spring bubbled up between moss-covered stones. "How much further tonight?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Another 2 hours to the old trapper's cabin I told you about. We'll hole up there until dawn, let the horses rest properly." Wade passed her his canteen. "How are you holding up?" "Tired, cold, terrified." She took a long drink of the icy water. "But still moving. That's all that matters." Wade studied the sky, reading something in the stars that Nora couldn't see. "Weather's holding. If we're lucky, we'll make it to Helena before the next storm hits. And if we're not lucky, then we get very wet and very cold and push through anyway." He took the canteen back, his fingers brushing hers in the darkness. "I won't let anything happen to you, Nora. Whatever it takes." "You can't promise that. You're not invincible, Wade, no matter how much you pretend to be." "I'm not pretending anything. I'm just refusing to consider alternatives." He remounted his horse. "Come on, the cabin's not far now." The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but after hours in the saddle, it looked like paradise. Wade got the horses settled while Nora lit a small fire in the stone fireplace, keeping the flames low so the smoke wouldn't be visible. They ate cold biscuits and dried meat, washing it down with water from Wade's canteen, neither willing to waste time or fuel heating anything. "You should sleep," Wade said, spreading a bedroll near the fire. "I'll take first watch. Wake me in a few hours. You need rest too." "I will." But something in his tone suggested he was lying, that he planned to keep watch all night and let her sleep through. Before Nora could argue, he'd moved to the cabin's single small window, positioning himself where he could see the approach trail. Nora lay down on the bedroll, pulling the blankets up to her chin. The fire's warmth was heavenly after the cold ride, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. But even as her eyes grew heavy, she found herself watching Wade's silhouette at the window. This man who'd become so central to her survival that she could barely remember what her life had been like before him. "Wade?" she said softly. "Yeah?" "What you said before we left, about things becoming real for you. What did you mean?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I meant that somewhere between saving your life and marrying you, between teaching you to shoot and watching you refuse to break under pressure that would destroy most people, I stopped being able to see you as just a witness I was protecting. You became something else. Someone else." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. "What did I become?" "Someone I can't imagine not having in my life." Wade's voice was rough, laden with emotion he was clearly struggling to control. "Someone who makes me think about futures I'd given up on. Someone who scares the hell out of me because losing you would hurt worse than anything I've survived so far." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect and terrifying. Nora sat up, the blankets falling away, her pulse racing. "Wade, don't." He still hadn't turned from the window. "Don't say anything yet, not here, not now, when we're running for our lives and emotions are high. When this is over, when we're safe in Helena and Blackstone's in chains, then we'll talk. Then you can decide if what you feel is real, or just gratitude and fear getting tangled up together." "You think I don't know my own mind? I think you've been through hell and you're not thinking clearly. I think you deserve the chance to make decisions when you're not terrified for your life." Finally, he turned to look at her, and even in the dim firelight she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I think you deserve better than a proposal made in a cabin while running from killers. So sleep, Nora. Let me keep you safe. And when this is over, we'll figure out what comes next." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that her feelings had nothing to do with fear or gratitude and everything to do with the man he'd proven himself to be. But maybe he was right. Maybe she needed to be sure, needed to separate the extraordinary circumstances from genuine emotion. So she lay back down and closed her eyes, forcing herself to sleep, even though her heart was still racing. When she woke, gray dawn light was seeping through the cabin's cracks, and Wade was crouched by the fire, making coffee. He looked haggard, shadows under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night, but his hands were steady as he poured the steaming liquid into 2 tin cups. "You didn't wake me for watch," Nora said accusingly. "You needed the sleep more than I did." He handed her a cup. "Drink up. We leave in 20 minutes. The second day's ride was harder than the first. The trail grew steeper, narrower, passing along cliff edges where one misstep would send them plummeting hundreds of feet to the rocks below. Nora forced herself not to look down, keeping her eyes fixed on her horse's ears and trusting the animal's instincts. Wade moved with infuriating confidence, his horse picking its way along paths that seemed barely wide enough for a mountain goat. By midday, they'd climbed above the tree line into a landscape of bare rock and stunted vegetation, where the wind howled with relentless fury and the sun beat down with unexpected intensity despite the cold. Nora's face burned, her lips cracked, and her body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. "Almost there," Wade called back to her, his words nearly lost in the wind. "See that saddle between the peaks? We cross that, and it's downhill to the next shelter." But as they approached the saddle, Wade suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand for silence. Nora stopped beside him, following his gaze to the rocky outcropping ahead. For a moment she saw nothing, then movement caught her eye, a figure stepping out from behind a boulder, rifle in hand. "Well now," a familiar voice called out, and Nora's blood ran cold. "Looks like my patience finally paid off. Hello, Mr. Forrester. Or should I call you Agent Forrester?" Conrad Blackstone stood on the trail ahead of them, immaculate despite the harsh conditions, his rifle aimed directly at Wade's chest. Behind him, 3 more men emerged from hiding, all armed, all wearing expressions that promised violence. "Blackstone." Wade's voice was dangerously calm. "How did you find us? You really think I don't know every trail in these mountains? I've been running operations here for 10 years. I know every path, every cabin, every hiding place." Blackstone's smile was cold. "When my men told me you disappeared from your ranch, I simply had to think about where a man with your background would go. This trail to Helena, it's what I'd have chosen too." "Let her go," Wade said. "Your problem is with me, not her." "Oh, but Mrs. Forrester is very much part of my problem. She saw me kill Marshal Hendricks. She's the only witness who can put a noose around my neck." Blackstone's eyes fixed on Nora, and she felt the same chill she'd felt that night in Silver Creek. "I have to admit I'm impressed. Running off and marrying a Pinkerton agent, that took imagination, but it won't save you. Nothing will." "You'll never get away with this," Nora said, forcing her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Wade sent the evidence to Denver. Even if you kill us, it's over for you." "Perhaps, but I'll have the satisfaction of knowing you won't live to testify. And I'll take that pleasure where I can find it." Blackstone gestured with his rifle. "Both of you, dismount, slowly. Any sudden moves and my men will shoot." Wade swung down from his horse, his movements careful and deliberate. Nora followed, her legs trembling as they touched ground. This was it, she realized. They'd come so far, survived so much, only to be caught like rats in a trap. But Wade wasn't done fighting. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes were cataloging everything. The positions of Blackstone's men, the terrain, possible escape routes. He was calculating odds, looking for an opening. "The evidence," Blackstone said. "Hand it over." "It's not here," Wade lied smoothly. "I hid it before we left. Kill us, and you'll never find it." "I think you're bluffing." Blackstone nodded to one of his men. "Search the saddlebags." The man moved toward Wade's horse, and that's when everything happened at once. Wade's hand flashed to his pistol with speed that seemed impossible, the gun clearing leather and firing before anyone could react. The man reaching for the saddlebags dropped with a scream, clutching his shoulder. Wade fired again, this time at Blackstone, but the mine owner had already thrown himself behind cover. "Run!" Wade shouted at Nora, providing covering fire as chaos erupted around them. But Nora didn't run. Instead, she did what Wade had taught her. She drew her own pistol, aimed at the nearest gunman, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her backward, but the man dropped his rifle and stumbled, blood blooming on his arm. Wade grabbed her hand and they ran, bullets whining past their heads as they scrambled up the rocky slope toward a cluster of boulders. One of Wade's horses screamed and went down, hit by gunfire. The other bolted, running back down the trail with the precious saddlebags still attached. They reached the boulders and dove behind them just as a bullet struck the rock where Nora's head had been, sending stone chips flying. Wade immediately returned fire, keeping Blackstone's men pinned while Nora reloaded with shaking hands. "There's a crevice about 50 feet up," Wade said between shots. "It leads to a cave system. If we can reach it, that's a big if. It's the only if we've got." Wade fired again, and one of Blackstone's men cried out. "On my signal, you run for it. I'll cover you." "I'm not leaving you. Nora, listen to me." Wade grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're what matters. Not the evidence, not the investigation, not revenge. You. If I can get you out of this alive, everything else is worth it. So when I say run, you run. Promise me." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him she wouldn't abandon him to die alone. But she saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear he was finally allowing her to see, and she understood. This wasn't about heroism or duty. This was about love, raw and real, and worth dying for. "I promise," she whispered. Wade nodded, then took a deep breath and stepped out from cover, firing rapidly to force Blackstone's men to duck. "Now, go!" Nora ran. She ran like she'd never run before, her legs pumping, her lungs burning, bullets kicking up dirt at her feet. Behind her, she could hear Wade's pistol firing, could hear him shouting to keep their attention on him. The crevice seemed impossibly far away, and she was certain with every step that the next bullet would find her. Then hands grabbed her from the side, yanking her into shadow. She screamed and struggled until a voice hissed, "Easy, Mrs. Forrester. I'm on your side." Nora found herself staring at the man from the ranch, the one who'd stopped the search, the one with the scar across his cheek. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd thought. His dark hair heavily threaded with gray, his face lined with years of hard living. "Who are you?" she gasped. "Name's Thomas Hendricks. The Marshal Blackstone murdered was my brother." His eyes were hard as flint. "I've been tracking Blackstone for months, got myself hired on with his operation. When I realized you were the witness, I did what I could to protect you without blowing my cover." "Wade, he's still out there." "I know. Come on, there's another way down." Thomas pulled her deeper into the crevice, into darkness that opened into a larger cave. "This system connects to a trail on the far side of the mountain. We can circle around, come at them from behind." "We have to help him." "We will. But not by running back into their guns." Thomas was already moving, clearly familiar with these caves. "Trust me, Mrs. Forrester. I want Blackstone dead as much as you do." They navigated the cave system quickly, Thomas leading with confidence born of previous exploration. Within minutes, they emerged on the far side of the ridge, the sounds of gunfire echoing from above. Thomas handed Nora a rifle from somewhere. "You know how to use this?" "Well enough." "Good. Because we're about to even the odds." They climbed quickly, silently, coming up behind Blackstone's position. Nora could see Wade now, pinned behind the boulders, his ammunition clearly running low. One of Blackstone's men was flanking him, creeping around the rocks with a pistol raised. Nora didn't hesitate. She raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel like Wade had taught her, and fired. The man dropped, and suddenly everyone's attention shifted. Thomas opened fire as well, and Blackstone's remaining gunman found themselves caught between two directions of attack. "Drop your weapons," Thomas shouted. "It's over, Blackstone." But Conrad Blackstone had no intention of surrendering. He broke from cover, running not away but directly at Wade's position, his rifle raised. Nora saw his intention a heartbeat before he pulled the trigger and screamed Wade's name in warning. Wade rolled aside, the bullet meant for his head striking rock instead. He came up firing, but his pistol clicked empty. Blackstone smiled and took aim again. The shot that stopped him came from an unexpected direction. One of Blackstone's own men, the one Nora had wounded in the arm, had his rifle pointed at his employer, smoke curling from the barrel. "I ain't dying for you, Blackstone," the man said, "and I ain't hanging for murder neither. This is done." Blackstone looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, his expression one of complete disbelief. He tried to raise his rifle, but his strength failed him. He collapsed to his knees, then pitched forward onto his face and lay still. The sudden silence was deafening. Nora ran to Wade, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "You're alive," he kept saying. "God, Nora, you're alive. So are you." She pulled back enough to see his face, to touch him and confirm he was real and whole. "When I thought he was going to kill you, I know. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips in a kiss that had nothing to do with pretense and everything to do with relief and desperation and something deeper that neither of them could deny anymore. Thomas Hendricks approached, rifle lowered. "We should move. There might be more of his men nearby." "You're right." Wade reluctantly released Nora, though he kept one arm around her waist as if afraid she might disappear. "We need to get to Helena, get this evidence to the prosecutor." "I'll come with you," Thomas said. "I can testify about my brother's investigation, corroborate everything you've found. Between the three of us, we'll bury what's left of Blackstone's operation." They retrieved Wade's surviving horse and the precious saddlebags, collected what weapons and supplies they could carry, and started down the mountain. Blackstone's wounded gunmen agreed to testify in exchange for leniency, confirming what they all suspected. The corruption went deep, involving officials throughout the territory. The rest of the journey to Helena was grueling, but uneventful. They pushed hard, stopping only when absolutely necessary, driven by the knowledge that Blackstone's allies might still try to stop them. But no one came. Perhaps word had already spread of Blackstone's death. Perhaps his empire was already crumbling without him to hold it together. They reached Helena 4 days after leaving the ranch, exhausted and battered, but alive. The federal prosecutor, a stern man named Morrison, listened to their testimony with growing astonishment. The evidence Wade had gathered, combined with Thomas Hendricks' inside knowledge, and Nora's eyewitness account of the marshal's murder, painted a picture of corruption so vast and systematic that it would take years to fully unravel. "This is extraordinary work," Morrison said, studying the documents spread across his desk. "Agent Forrester, the Pinkerton agency should be proud. And Mrs. Forrester, your bravery in coming forward, despite the danger to your own life, it's remarkable." "When can she testify?" Wade asked. "When will this go to trial?" "I'll begin filing charges immediately. With Blackstone dead, many of his co-conspirators will likely try to save themselves by turning state's evidence. But yes, we'll need Mrs. Forrester's testimony about the marshal's murder. That's the linchpin that ties everything else together." Morrison looked at Nora kindly. "I know you've been through an ordeal, ma'am, but I promise you'll have protection every step of the way. The territorial governor himself has agreed to provide security." "How long?" Nora asked. "How long until I can go back to my life?" "The preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks. The trial itself could be several months away, but after you testify at the hearing, the immediate danger should pass. The governor will issue a public statement about the investigation, and with Blackstone dead and his operation exposed, there will be no one left with reason to harm you." 2 weeks. Nora could survive 2 more weeks. The prosecutor arranged for them to stay in a boarding house under guard until the hearing. Nora and Wade were given separate rooms. Propriety demanded it despite their marriage. But that first night, as she lay in a real bed for the first time in over a week, Nora found herself unable to sleep. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. She'd left Silver Creek as Nora Callan, seamstress and spinster. She'd become Nora Forrester, witness and fugitive. And somewhere in between, without quite meaning to, she'd fallen in love with the man who'd saved her life. A soft knock at her door made her sit up. "Nora? Are you awake?" She opened the door to find Wade standing in the hallway, still fully dressed, his expression uncertain. "I know it's improper, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how close we came to losing everything today, and He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Can we talk?" "Of course." She stepped back, letting him enter. They sat in the 2 chairs by the window, the street below quiet and dark. "In the mountains, when Blackstone had us cornered, I thought we were going to die," Wade said quietly. "And all I could think was that I'd never told you the truth. Never said what I should have said days ago." What truth? Wade took her hand, his thumb stroking over her wedding ring. That this stopped being pretend for me almost from the start. That every day with you, every conversation, every moment, it made me believe in things I thought I'd lost when Elizabeth died. Made me remember what it felt like to hope for a future instead of just surviving the present. Nora's breath caught. Wade, let me finish, please. He looked up, meeting her eyes. You asked me what you'd become to me. You became the reason I fought so hard to stay alive. You became the person I thought about when I imagined what might come after all this was over. You became my wife, not just on paper, but in my heart. And I don't know how to undo that. Don't know if I want to. Then don't, Nora said softly. Don't undo it. Don't walk away. You said you wanted freedom when this was over. I said I wanted the choice. And I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. She squeezed his hand. I spent 3 years in Silver Creek building a safe, small life. No risks, no complications, no deep connections. I thought that was what I wanted. But you showed me something different. You showed me what it means to have someone stand beside you, not because they have to, but because they want to. Someone who sees you at your worst and doesn't run. Someone who makes you braver than you knew you could be. Nora, I love you, Wade Forrester. I don't know when it happened exactly, maybe when you were teaching me to shoot, or dancing with me in the firelight, or just in the 1,000 small kindnesses you showed when you could have treated me like a burden. But it happened, and I'm not taking it back. Wade stood abruptly, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. When he kissed her this time, there was nothing chaste about it, nothing held back. It was a kiss that spoke of fear overcome and love acknowledged, of promises made and futures imagined. Nora kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands in his hair, her body pressed against his, finally allowing herself to feel everything she'd been holding at bay. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I love you too. God help me. I tried not to, tried to keep it professional, but you made it impossible. Good. Nora smiled through the tears streaming down her face. Because I don't want a professional relationship, Wade. I want a real marriage. I want to build a real life with you. Not because I have to, not out of gratitude or fear, but because I can't imagine my future without you in it. Even if that future includes a ranch in the middle of nowhere with terrible winters and ornery cattle. Especially then. Though I reserve the right to open a seamstress shop in whatever passes for the nearest town. Deal. Wade kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a claiming. When this is all over, when you've testified and we're free to go where we want, stay with me, Nora. Not as my protected witness or my legal arrangement. Stay as my wife, my partner, my love. Stay and build a life that's messy and real and ours. I will, she whispered. I promise I will. The preliminary hearing 2 weeks later was anticlimactic compared to everything that had come before. Nora testified about what she'd seen that night in Silver Creek, her voice calm and clear as she described Conrad Blackstone murdering Marshall Hendricks in cold blood. Thomas Hendricks corroborated his brother's investigation. Wade presented the evidence, document by damning document. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Charges would proceed against 17 territorial officials and businessmen connected to Blackstone's operation. The governor himself, facing allegations of accepting bribes, resigned in disgrace. The territorial marshal was arrested, and Nora Callan Forrester was officially cleared of any wrongdoing and released from protection. It's over, she said to Wade as they left the courthouse, blinking in the bright sunshine. It's really over. It is. He took her hand, that simple gesture now carrying the weight of everything they'd been through together. What do you want to do first? I want to go home, Nora said simply. Back to the ranch. Back to Sam and the horses and the mountains. I want to start the life we promised each other. Then that's what we'll do. They returned to Elkhorn Ranch in late autumn, riding through valleys painted gold and crimson by changing leaves. Sam met them on the porch, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. Welcome home, Mrs. Forrester. For real this time. It's good to be home, Sam. For real this time. Over the following months, as winter settled over the mountains and the world outside faded to white silence, Nora and Wade built the life they'd promised each other. She opened a small seamstress shop in the nearest town, taking commissions from ranchers' wives and townspeople who quickly learned that Mrs. Forrester had skills that extended well beyond simple mending. Wade continued his work with the Pinkertons, but he chose assignments closer to home, cases that let him return to Nora at the end of each day instead of disappearing for months at a time. They argued sometimes about little things and big ones. They learned each other's quirks and habits, the ways they fit together, and the places they rubbed each other wrong. But through it all, they loved, deeply, permanently, with the kind of certainty that came from having faced death together and chosen life. The trial, when it finally came the following spring, lasted 3 weeks and ended with convictions for everyone involved. The territorial papers called it the biggest corruption scandal in Wyoming's history. Politicians and businessmen went to prison, laws were changed. And somewhere in the middle of all the legal maneuvering and public outrage, Nora's testimony about that night in Silver Creek became the linchpin that held everything else together, just as Prosecutor Morrison had predicted. On the day the verdicts were read, Wade took Nora's hand as they sat in the courtroom and whispered, "You did it. You brought them all down." "We did it," she corrected. "Together." 2 years later, on a summer evening warm enough that they could sit on the porch and watch the sun paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Nora sat in Wade's lap with their 6-month-old daughter sleeping against her shoulder. The child had Wade's dark hair and Nora's brown eyes, and she'd been born during a spring snowstorm with only Wade and Sam to help deliver her. They'd named her Elizabeth Grace, Elizabeth for the woman Wade had loved and lost, Grace for the second chance they'd both been given. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked, his hand resting on Nora's waist, his chin on her shoulder so he could see their daughter's sleeping face. "Giving up the life you had, the plans you made?" "Every single day," Nora said, then smiled at his shocked expression. "I regret that I had to witness a murder to find you. I regret the fear and the running and the danger. I regret that Elizabeth and Marshall Hendricks had to die for us to be here. But this, us, our life together?" She turned her head to kiss him softly. "This I don't regret for a single second." "Good." Wade's arms tightened around her and their daughter. "Because I plan to keep you here forever. You, me, Sam, however many children we end up with. Maybe a few more horses. This is where you belong, Nora Forrester. With me." "I know," she said, leaning back against him and watching the sun sink lower toward the mountains. "I figured that out the night you taught me to dance, or maybe the day you taught me to shoot. Definitely by the time you married me to keep me safe." She paused, considering. "Actually, I think I knew the moment you dropped that rope down the alley wall in Silver Creek. Everything after that was just me catching up to what my heart already knew." "And what was that?" "That some cowboys are worth trusting your life to, and some marriages that start with fear, end with love that can outlast anything." She felt him smile against her shoulder. That sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the thing that saves you. And that home isn't a place. It's a person who stands beside you when the world turns dark and promises you'll face whatever comes together. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finally slipped behind the mountains and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear Sam beginning to prepare dinner, the familiar sounds of domesticity that now defined their days. Their horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. Chickens scratched in the yard. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed as they settled for the night. It was an ordinary evening on an ordinary ranch in the Wyoming Territory, with nothing to distinguish it from thousands of other evenings in thousands of other homes across the West. Except for the two people on the porch, who'd traveled through fear and violence and loss to arrive at this moment of perfect peace, who'd married for protection and stayed for love, who'd proven that sometimes the greatest adventures end not with drama, but with quiet joy and the simple promise of tomorrow. Wade kissed the top of Nora's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the weight of their daughter in her arms and the solid realness of this life they'd built together. "I love you, Nora Forrester." "I love you too, Wade Forrester." She smiled, content and complete. Now and always. Years later, when their children were grown and their hair had turned gray, when the ranch had expanded and the territory had become a state, when the story of the witness and the Pinkerton had faded into local legend, Wade and Nora would still sit on that same porch and watch the sunset together. They'd hold hands and remember the terror and the triumph, the running and the fighting, the moment in a ranch house living room when they'd spoken vows that started as necessity and became truth. "You know what I think?" Nora would say, her voice carrying the soft rasp of age but losing none of its strength. "I think I was supposed to witness that murder. I think I was supposed to run and hide and be terrified. Because it was the only way the universe could get me to stop being so damn careful and actually live." "You think God wanted you to see a man get killed?" Wade would tease, his arm around her shoulders, his body still solid despite the years. "I think God wanted me to meet you, and he knew I was too stubborn to do it any normal way, so he had to get creative." She'd lean into him, fitting against his side the way she had for decades. "Best creative decision he ever made, if you ask me." And Wade, pulling her close as the sun painted the sky in shades of fire and the wind whispered through the pines, would have to agree. Because some love stories start with gunfire and end with grace, and some promises made in fear become the foundation of joy that lasts a lifetime. They'd married for protection but found something infinitely more valuable. They'd found home in each other's arms, found peace after violence, found love that could outlast fear itself. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered, the only truth worth telling. The seamstress and the cowboy, the witness and the agent, the woman who ran and the man who saved her, became simply Nora and Wade, two people who'd faced the darkness together and chose every day, for the rest of their lives, to walk toward the light hand in hand. And they lived, as the old stories say, happily ever after. Not because their life was perfect or easy, but because they'd learned the greatest truth of all, that love built on trust and tested by fire becomes unbreakable, that marriages born of necessity can transform into partnerships of choice, and that sometimes the most terrifying journey leads exactly where your heart needed to go all along.